Gideon Vale did not send a warning. He sent 14 men. Rode out before the sky had any color in it, and they carried torches, not because they needed light, but because he wanted the families to see them coming. 3 homesteads along the Pecos cutoff burned that same night. An old woman named Marta Yellen was dragged from her bed and left standing in her nightgown in the cold, while Vale's men piled her furniture in the yard and struck a match. Her deed signed and legal, witnessed by 2 county clerks, was used to light the fire. Gideon Vale watched from horseback with his hands folded across the saddle horn, and when she screamed at him, he told her that the law in this part of Texas was what he said it was. It was not wrong. Not yet. If you've ever watched someone take everything a person had and call it business, you already know what kind of story this is. Stay with it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't, and hit that like button so more people can find this story. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all started. Cole Mercer came into Texas the way most men with bad histories do, quiet, at an odd hour on a road nobody else was using. Crossed back from the New Mexico territory 3 days prior, following a rumor he hadn't wanted to believe. Rumor had legs, though. Every town he passed through, every saddle tramp he stopped at a waterhole, ever a bartender who looked at him twice and then looked away, they all said some version of the same thing. Gideon Vale was moving. He was buying land that wasn't for sale and burning the parts that refused to be bought, and somewhere in the middle of all that, he'd put a bounty on anyone who stood in his way. Cole had been standing in his way for 2 years without fully realizing it. He wasn't a man who thought much about the shape of his own life. He knew what he was good at, and he knew what that cost him, and he'd made a kind of peace with the arithmetic of it. Could shoot. He could read country, the rise of a ridge, the cut of a creek, the way a man's shoulders changed when he was about to do something he wouldn't be able to take back. He'd hired those skills out to people who needed them, and he'd never once pretended that the work was clean. Some of it wasn't. Some of it still woke him at 4 in the morning with the particular silence that follows a memory you'd rather not have. 34 years old, and he looked older in the eyes. Rourke, his horse, was a gray gelding with a temper and a memory for terrain that Cole had come to depend on more than he'd admit. The animal had carried him out of 3 situations that should have ended differently, and Cole fed him better than he fed himself and never apologized for it. When they came down off the cap rock and into the low, brushy country near the river, Rourke flicked his ears forward and held them there. Not alarm, exactly, but attention. Cole felt it, and slowed without reaching for anything. Just listening, wind, cottonwoods along the creek, a hawk working a thermal somewhere to the south. Nothing that meant danger yet. He rode on. The town of Brackwell was the first place he stopped long enough to learn something useful. It was a railroad supply town, kind that had ambitions it couldn't quite afford wide unpaved streets. A hotel that had been built anticipating more traffic than ever arrived. The land office with fresh paint that stood out against every other sun-bleached facade on the block. Cole bought grain for Rourke at the livery and asked the old man who ran it whether Silas Rourke was still out at Callaway Ford. Liveryman looked at him the way people looked at bad news. Silas is still there, he said. Don't know for how much longer. What does that mean? Means Vale's been buying up everything from the river to the breaks. Some folks sold. Some didn't get a chance to decide before their barns caught fire in the middle of the night. He kept working the curry comb across his horse's flank, not looking at Cole. Silas ain't the selling type. You know him? My father did. The liveryman nodded slowly. Your father have a name? Frank Mercer. The man stopped brushing. He looked at Cole then, really looked at him, and Cole watched him put the pieces together. Surname. The way Cole was built long through the shoulders, a particular stillness in the way he held himself when he wasn't moving. Something in the face that didn't quite belong to the youth of the body. Frank Mercer's boy, the liveryman said. I was. The man handed the curry comb to a boy in the corner and walked Cole out of the livery and onto the street, and he told him what he knew about Vale in low, careful sentences, the way a man talks when he's not sure who's listening. Vale had arrived in this country 18 months ago with money nobody could account for, and lawyers who seemed to materialize out of nowhere whenever there was a title dispute. He'd bought 3 large ranches clean. He'd pushed 2 more families out through means that couldn't be proven in any court that Vale hadn't already gotten to. He had an arrangement with the county judge. He had an arrangement with the town marshal, who was a man named Ike Pryor, capable, loyal to whoever paid him, smart enough to stay inside the law on most occasions. The families he pushed out, Cole said. Where'd they go? Some of them are in tents east of town. Some just left. The liveryman looked down the street. Marta Yellen's living with her daughter in Laredo now. She owned 60 acres outright, and Vale's company has the deed recorded like she signed it over voluntary. Did she? She's 71 years old and she can't read. Cole looked at the land office with its fresh paint. He stood there long enough that the liveryman got uncomfortable. What are you going to do? The man asked. Go see Silas, Cole said. He rode out before anyone in town thought to send word ahead of him, though he suspected somebody did anyway. That was the nature of small places in troubled times. Information moved faster than horses when there was money attached to it. Road to Callaway Ford was a 2-hour ride through country that got emptier and quieter the further south he went. He passed 2 properties that had clearly been abandoned, recently gates left open. A pump handle rusting at a dry trough, the particular hollowed-out look a house gets when nobody slept in it for a while. One of them still had a child's tin cup sitting on the porch rail. He didn't stop. Found Silas Rourke exactly where he expected to find him, in front of his barn, doing work that needed doing, with a rifle leaning against the fence post 6 feet away and his eyes already on the road before Cole was close enough to hail. Silas was 71, and he looked like something the frontier had tried to wear down and given up on. He was a lean man, not tall, with a face that had been baked and creased by 40 years of the sun, on hands that were always busy, that particular habit of frontiermen who'd grown up believing that idle hands were a kind of moral failure. Fought Comanches, when Comanches were still a real threat. Buried a wife and 2 sons, one to fever and one to a disagreement with a man in a saloon in Uvalde that Cole had heard about secondhand and never asked about directly. I had a dog named Patch, who was old and fat and useless, and who Silas talked to more than he talked to most people. He watched Cole come up the road, and he didn't reach for the rifle, which meant he'd recognized him at a distance. That was Silas always reading the land. Thought you were in New Mexico, Silas said when Cole pulled up. I was. What brought you back? You. Silas studied him. He had pale eyes, the kind that had faded over the years from whatever color they'd started at into something closer to winter sky. Didn't miss much. Who told you? He said. Nobody told me anything specific. I pieced it together. From where? From 3 different conversations in 3 different towns. From the fact that a family I sold provisions to last spring out of Dry Creek has disappeared, and their property is now listed under a company called Consolidated Western Land. From the fact that your name came up twice in connection with Vale, and not in a way that suggested you were friendly. Silas grunted. He picked up a fence rail and dropped it into a gap in the fence line he'd apparently been repairing, and then he looked at it critically like he was thinking about something else entirely. Come inside, he said. I'll put coffee on. The house was the same house Cole remembered from years ago when his father had brought him here twice as a boy. Low ceilings, thick adobe walls, a fireplace built for function rather than appearance. Silas's wife had hung curtains once, and the curtain rods were still there, but there were no curtains now. Just a couple of deer hides tacked up against the north wall to cut the drafts, and a table that had been built by someone who understood that a table's job was to survive use rather than to be admired. On the table, there was a letter. Cole looked at it without touching it. Come recently? He asked. 2 weeks ago. Silas poured coffee without asking how Cole took it, because Cole had drunk it black since he was 16, and Silas had been there for that particular development. From Vale's company. Offers me fair market value for the ranch and everything on it. That's more than most people got. That's because I'm more trouble than most people. Silas sat down across from him. I turned it down. Week after that, 2 of my fence lines got cut, and my cattle were 3 miles from where they should have been. The first message. What was the second? One of my hands boy named Deckard, been with me 3 years, came to work one morning, with a bruise across his jaw and his resignation already in his hand. He didn't say who hit him. He didn't need to. Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. How many men do you have left? None. After Deckard left, the other one older fellow named Kravathes got a family in town. I told him to go. So it's just you and Patch. Silas glanced at the dog, who was asleep by the fireplace in a dedicated and total way. About as useful as he looks. Cole almost smiled. Silas, I know what you're going to say. You don't. D, you're going to tell me to take the money. Or to go stay with somebody. That it's not worth it. Silas looked at him steadily. Your father said the same kind of things to me in 42 different situations, and he was wrong every single time. My father is dead. I know he is. Silas's voice didn't change. He died because he was standing between something that mattered and something that wanted to destroy it. That's not a bad way to go, Cole. There are worse things. Cole put his cup down. That's not an argument for throwing your life away. It's not throwing it away if you're choosing what to use it for. Silas leaned forward. I've been on this land for 32 years. I have the deed. I have the survey markers. I have the water rights on the creek, documented and filed, which is the real reason Vale wants this property. Because without this creek, his plans for the valley won't hold together. He controls the water, and every family between here and the breaks loses their livelihood inside of 2 years. He sat back. That's what this is actually about. Not the land. The water. Cole was quiet for a moment. You figured that out recently? Last month, I had a man in San Antonio look into Vale's filings. The land he's been acquiring, it all follows the creek. Piece of it. Callaway Ford is the last upstream property he doesn't own, which is why he stopped being patient. Cole looked at the letter again. Then he looked at Silas. You didn't send for me, he said. Why not? Because you have enough trouble of your own, and I don't believe in asking for what I can handle myself. Can you handle it? Silas was quiet long enough that the answer was clear. No, he said finally, not at my age and not alone. But I wasn't going to ask. Cole picked up his coffee and finished it. Yeah. Then he set the cup down and looked around the room at the rifle rods over the door, at the cabinet in the corner that he suspected held more than kitchen goods, at the map of the ranch pinned to the wall with a thumbtack and annotated in Silas's precise handwriting. Show me what you have, he said. Silas looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in those pale eyes, not relief exactly, more like the acknowledgement of something he'd been carrying alone for a while that he could now set down for a minute. Stood up and went to the cabinet. It was not a kitchen cabinet. Doors opened on a rack of rifles, 4 of them, a shotgun, 2 handguns that Cole recognized as quality work, and enough ammunition to hold a position for days. At the bottom of the cabinet, wrapped in oilcloth, was something longer and heavier than the rest. That's a Sharps, Cole said. Modified Sharps, Silas said. Unwrapped it partially, enough to confirm what it was, then wrapped it back up. I'll tell you about that one later. The point is, I've been thinking about this for a while. How long is a while? Since the first fence line got cut. Silas looked at the rifles with an expression that wasn't pleasure and wasn't exactly regret either. Gah, it was the look of a man who had hoped things would go differently and had made arrangements for when they didn't. I've been thinking about how 14 men could be made to feel like 40. Cole looked at him. You counted the riders? Counted them the morning they circled the south pasture 2 weeks ago. Didn't come in that time, just wanted me to see them. 14 men, 7 carrying rifles, the rest with revolvers. They had 2 men on the ridge overlooking the barn and 1 covering the road. He pointed at specific points on the wall map. Professionals, not hired hands with guns. Vale spent money on these men. Cole studied the map. Could see what Silas had been doing. The pencil marks, the measurements, the notes about sight lines and distances, and the way the creek bent behind the barn. We've been planning defensive positions, Cole said. I've been planning a fight, Silas corrected. Defensive is when you're waiting to lose. I'm planning to make them regret they came. Cole looked at the map for a long time. He traced the creek with his finger. He looked at the ridge line to the north, the shallow gully that ran from the road to the eastern fence. He looked at the barn placement, the angle of the house, the way the terrain funneled riders toward certain natural choke points. Thought about 14 men. He thought about Silas, 71 years old, with a Sharps rifle and enough ammunition and a dog named Patch. He thought about water rights and burned houses and a woman's legal deed used as kindling. Gah. He thought about his father, who had died standing between something that mattered and something that wanted to destroy it. All right, Cole said. Silas looked at him. We're going to need to move the horses tonight, Cole said. I want to dig 2 positions we haven't talked about yet. One here, he pointed at the map, and one along this tree line. I want fields of fire that cross each other. Silas was quiet for a moment. Think they're coming soon, he said. I think they're coming tomorrow, Cole said. Or the day after. You turned down the offer, and you're still here. Vale isn't a patient man. I've seen his other operations. Gives people one real chance, and then he sends the men who don't ask questions. Silas sat back down. He looked at the map. He looked at Cole. Your father would be glad you came, he said. Cole didn't say anything to that. He stood up and pulled on his coat and looked toward the door, because there was work to do, and the sun was already past midday, and whatever tomorrow was going to bring, it was not going to find him unprepared. Outside, Rourke was still where he'd left him. Patient and watchful. his ears still doing that forward tilt thing that Cole had learned to respect as a reliable indicator of the horse's mood. Cole untied him and led him toward the barn. He did not look at the horizon. Did not need to. He already knew what was coming. The only question was whether, between 2 men and 1 dog, and a cabinet full of rifles and a map penciled over with sight lines and distances, would be enough to make Gideon Vale's professionals feel the particular weight of choosing the wrong piece of land on the wrong day. That night, Cole worked. He moved fence rails to create channels he'd want, dug 2 shallow firing positions along the tree line east of the house, walked the creek in the dark and memorized its depth and its banks and the sound it made where it turned. He moved Rourke and Silas's 2 horses to the cedar break half a mile south, where they wouldn't be spooked by gunfire or grabbed for leverage. And he did all of this quietly, without discussing it, because some of it he didn't want Silas to know about yet. Silas watched from the porch for a while and then went inside. When Cole finally came in close to midnight, Silas was sitting at the table with the wrapped Sharps rifle in front of him and 2 cups of coffee steaming beside it. Cole sat down. Silas unwrapped the rifle. It was older than it looked, which was the mark of a weapon that had been maintained with obsessive care. Stock had been replaced with a piece of walnut that had been worked by hand into a slightly different angle at the cheek rest, better suited to a long prone position. Barrel had been cleaned so many times the metal had a different quality than factory bluing. There was a sight fitted to it that Cole didn't recognize from any catalog he'd seen. 400 yards dependable, Silas said. I've taken it to 5 on a still day. Who did the work on it? I did. Over about 6 years, he turned it on the table. It's yours. Cole looked at him. I'm not taking your rifle, Silas. I'm not giving it to you. I'm telling you it'll be in the barn tomorrow, and if everything goes the way I think it might, you're going to want access to something that shoots that far. Cole looked at the rifle. He thought about a ridge position. About 14 men. What are you not telling me about Vale? He asked. Silas looked at the rifle too. He's coming personally, he said. My source in Brackwell, the liveryman. He sent word this afternoon while you were out back digging. Vale rode through town 2 hours ago with a marshal's commission and 4 men he keeps close. He's not sending hired hands this time to watch. He wants to see it done. Cole sat with that for a moment. So tomorrow isn't just 14 riders, he said. Tomorrow is 14 riders and Gideon Vale watching from somewhere he thinks is safe. Silas's voice was level. Which means it's also an opportunity. The words sat between them like something loaded. Cole reached for his coffee. Outside, the Texas dark pressed against the windows. The creek ran somewhere in the low ground behind the barn, and somewhere much further away, on a road that was still being traveled. 14 men were making camp and checking their guns, and probably not thinking much about the morning, because men like that didn't tend to think far ahead. They were used to operations that ended quickly, against targets who didn't fight back. They had never ridden against Silas Rourke. They had never been in the same county as Cole Mercer. The lamp between them threw shadows across the map on the wall. Silas's pencil marks glowed faintly in the light sightlines. Distances. The particular patience of a man who had decided, a long time ago, that this piece of land was worth whatever it cost to keep. Cole looked at those marks. He thought about water. He thought about Marta Yellen, standing in her yard in her nightgown. Thought about a child's tin cup on an empty porch in the middle of a road nobody was using anymore. Picked up a pencil. Move this position here, he said, pointing at the map. 3 feet further north. The angle's better, and it gives you cover from the ridge. Silas leaned in and looked at it. That puts me in the open for the approach. You won't be approached from that direction. Cole indicated the creek line. I'll be there. Silas looked at where Cole was pointing. Looked at Cole. That's going to be cold, he said. Creek runs cold this time of year. I know it. Silas considered this for a moment. Then he picked up his own pencil and made a small mark on the map where Cole had indicated. All right, he said. They worked for another hour, refining positions, trading information about terrain features Cole had found in the dark and Silas had known for 30 years. Coffee went cold and they drank it anyway. The lamp burned lower. After a while, Silas put his pencil down and sat back and looked at the ceiling. He told me once. Silas said, not explaining who he meant, because both of them knew that the worst thing a man can do is let something wrong go uncorrected, just because correcting it costs something. Cole said nothing. I told him he was going to get himself killed with thinking like that.
You did?
Yes. Silas looked at the ceiling a moment longer. He was still right, though. Cole folded the map. stood up and picked up his hat from the peg by the door. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch. We're working all evening. I sleep light, go on." Silas stood slowly, with the careful movement of a man whose joints had their own opinions about cold weather and long days. Picked up the rifle and carried it to the cabinet, set it back in its place with deliberate care. "Cole," he said, not turning around. "Yeah, I'm glad you came." Cole put his hat on. "Get some sleep, Silas." He went out onto the porch. Patch followed him, the old dog moving with the particular dignity of an animal who had decided that life owed him comfort at this point and was going to collect. Cole sat in the chair. Silas kept on the porch and looked out at the dark. Creek muttered somewhere below. The wind had dropped and the stars were very clear. Could see the ridge line to the north, the dark mass of the tree line to the east, the pale trace of the road coming down from Brackwell like a thread laid across the land. 14 men. He sat with that number. He was good at his work. He'd always been good at it, which was its own kind of burden being, good at something that left marks on you that didn't heal clean. He thought sometimes about what a different life might look like, one where he'd gone somewhere settled and learned a trade, and had people who counted on him for ordinary things. He wasn't sure he was made for that. He wasn't sure he wasn't. But he knew what this was. This was the thing his father had talked about, the moment when the cost of walking away was higher than the cost of staying. Yeah? When you could see clearly what would happen if you left, and you could see clearly what might happen if you didn't, and the math of it wasn't even close. Sat on the porch of Silas Rourke's ranch at Callaway Ford. In the dark. Cold. 14 men coming and a water right. That meant the difference between life and ruin for every family downstream. He did not feel heroic. He felt tired and clear-eyed and committed, which was a better thing to feel when morning was coming. He watched the road. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Creek kept talking in the low ground. Patch curled at his feet and sighed with immense satisfaction, because the dog had no idea what tomorrow was going to be, and wouldn't have cared if he did. Cole sat in the cold and watched the road and waited for the sky to change. Sky changed the way Silas had predicted. It would slow and colorless at first, a gray seeping in from the east that wasn't quite light but wasn't dark anymore either. Kind of hour that plays tricks on men who are tired and watching for something they know is coming. Cole had been awake for all of it. He'd traded the porch for the tree line around 2 in the morning, moving low and quiet through the frost-stiff grass to the eastern position he'd dug the night before. A shallow thing 18 inches deep, 3 feet wide, scraped out of the hard caliche with a mattock he'd found in Silas's barn, but it sat in a hollow where the ground folded down toward the creek, and from it he could see the road, the south approach, and the near edge of the ridge without being visible from any of them. He'd lined the bottom with a folded saddle blanket because the ground at that depth was cold enough to pull the warmth out of a man in an hour. He'd settled in with a rifle across his forearms and his hat pulled low and let his body go still in the way that took years to learn and couldn't be faked. Patch had tried to follow him, and Cole had turned the dog back twice before Patch gave up and went back to the porch with the wounded dignity of an animal being denied something reasonable. Silas came out of the house at 5:15. Cole knew it was Silas without looking because Silas moved a certain way deliberate, always deliberate, the economy of a man who'd learned that unnecessary motion was a form of noise. Crossed to the barn and went inside. And a few minutes later a lamp came on at the barn's small window. Low and shuttered, barely visible. Cole watched the road. At 5:43 by his internal count, he'd never carried a watch and didn't intend to start. He saw the first of them. It came from the north, off the Brackwell Road, which meant they'd staged somewhere between town and the ranch. 14 riders, just as Silas had counted, moving in a loose formation that told Cole they'd been briefed on the terrain. 2 of them peeled off immediately toward the ridge. They knew about the ridge, which meant somebody had scouted this property recently and carefully. 3 more angled east toward the creek crossing below the barn. Remaining 9 came straight down the road toward the house, which was exactly where Silas was not. Cole watched them come and kept his breathing even. The man at the front of the 9 was tall in the saddle, wearing a canvas duster and a hat with a flat brim. He rode like a man who'd done this kind of approach before. Not fast, not slow. The horse kept to a walk because a walking horse was quieter and because a man who was sure of his numbers didn't need to hurry. He had a rifle laid across his saddle and his eyes were moving in the right way. Checking the house, checking the barn, checking the tree line. He didn't check the hollow. Cole let them get to within 60 yards of the house before Silas's voice came from inside the barn loud. unhurried, carrying the particular authority of a man who intends to be heard. That's far enough. The 9 riders stopped. The leader put up a hand and the others held. Silas Rourke, the leader called out. His voice was flat, professional, with no particular accent that pinned him to any state. My name is Cord Halsey. I work for Consolidated Western Land. Mr. Vale has authorized me to make a final offer on this property before. I heard his last offer, Silas said. My answer didn't change. Mr. Rourke, be reasonable. You're one man. That's been said to me before. Halsey sat his horse and looked at the barn. Cole watched him think. He was calculating, trying to locate Silas by sound, trying to read the barn for cover and exits, trying to account for variables in a situation that had just presented him with a variable he hadn't expected. Come out and we can talk about this, Halsey said. We're talking fine from here. Mr. Vale wants this resolved peacefully. Then tell Mr. Vale to cancel his offer and leave this country, and I'll be peaceful as a Sunday morning. A pause. Otherwise, you're trespassing on private land, and I'd like you to turn your horses around. Halsey looked back at the man riding beside him. Something communicated without words, a small shift in posture, and Cole felt the change in the air the way you feel a change in weather. Not a sound, not a movement, just the sudden weight of a decision being made. Mr. Rourke, Halsey said, his voice dropping the pretense of negotiation, step out of that barn and put your hands where I can see them. The shot that came from the barn was not aimed at Halsey. Went over his head by a calculated margin, Silas being precise, as always, and kicked up dirt 20 feet behind the lead rider. Between the main group and the retreat, which told the horses something the men might have ignored. 2 of the 9 shied hard. One of them nearly unseated his rider. Formation broke apart in the small, ugly way that a disciplined group breaks when it stops being sure of itself. Cole was already moving. Came up out of the hollow low and fast. Crossed 12 feet of open ground to the fence line. Went over it without slowing. And hit the tree line east of the barn before the dust from the shot had settled. He was behind 3 of the creek riders before they'd located the source of the sound. Drop them, he said. 2 of the 3 turned to look. The third one, credit to him, went for his rifle instead, and Cole put a round into the dirt between the horse's front hooves, which accomplished what he needed without hurting the animal. Horse went sideways, and the man came off it hard and landed on one shoulder, and by the time he'd gotten his face out of the dirt, Cole had the other 2 covered, and the situation had changed. Rifles on the ground, Cole said. Slow they did it. We're reading him, the way he held the gun, the stillness in him, the fact that his shot had been exactly placed. Not panicked, and they were reaching a conclusion that a professional reaches when he encounters someone at least as professional as himself. Math was shifting. Somewhere to the north, on the ridge, there were 2 more men. Cole had a problem. He kept the 3 creek riders between himself and the ridge as he moved them back toward the fence, watching the ridge line for movement. Could hear Halsey shouting something at the barn threats first, then demands, voice rising in a way that said the negotiation was well and truly over, and he could hear Silas's responses, which were short and not particularly worried in tone. And then a second shot from the barn that was again precisely placed, this time putting a crease in the hat of the man immediately to Halsey's left. Silas was buying time, or he was managing 9 men from inside a barn with excellent sight lines and enough ammunition to make that sustainable. Cole got the 3 creek riders behind the fence and used a leather cord from his coat pocket. He carried 3 of them always, for reasons that ranged from practical to unfortunate, to secure the wrists of the one who'd tried for the rifle, because that one had made a decision, and people who make decisions tend to revisit them. Stay down and stay quiet, he said to all 3. This ends one way or another in the next 20 minutes, and you've got a choice about which side of it you're on. Didn't wait for them to respond. He went back through the tree line toward the ridge. 2 ridgemen were the part of this that had been bothering him since Silas said the number 14. Ridge positions were overwatch. They were there to cover the main force, and they would be watching the barn and the house, which meant they might not have eyes on the tree line east of the creek. They'd heard the shots. They knew something had gone wrong with the creek approach. Cole climbed the ridge from the south, using a dry wash he'd found in the dark the night before, moving fast now because speed was what the moment needed. Came up on the east side of the 2 ridgemen, while they were both focused north, looking toward the barn, talking to each other in low, urgent voices. He was 8 feet away before either of them knew he was there. Rifles down, he said. One of them complied immediately, which meant he was smart. The other turned fast with his weapon, and Cole covered the distance between them in 3 steps and took the rifle out of the conversation before the man had finished deciding to use it. It was a brief, ugly struggle, the kind that happens when 2 people are in very close proximity with conflicting intentions. And it ended with the second ridgeman on the ground, and his rifle in Cole's left hand, and Cole's own rifle pointed at the one who'd been smart. "I'm not going to ask again," Cole said, slightly out of breath. "We got it," the smart one said, hands visible. "We got it." Cole looked at them both. He looked down toward the main group, where the situation had developed in ways he hadn't been watching for the last 2 minutes. What he saw was Silas. The old man had come out of the barn. Cole didn't know why, maybe a pressure inside the barn he hadn't anticipated. Maybe a calculation Cole couldn't follow from this distance. But Silas was standing in the open between the barn and the house, 30 yards from Halsey's group, with a rifle in his hands, and the particular posture of a man who has decided that he's done with concessions. 7 of the 9 riders were still mounted. Halsey was in front of them. The other 2 had their horses under uncertain control off to the side. And one of those men was also standing now on foot, with his rifle pointed at the ground in a way that could change quickly. "Come out here alone," Halsey said, and there was something new in his voice. Not respect exactly, but a recalibration. He'd expected a frightened old man, and he'd gotten something else. "I've been alone all morning," Silas said. "Didn't seem to slow me down. Think this ends well for you?" "I think it ends." Silas looked at him steadily. "Question is what it costs you before it does." Cole was already working down the ridge. He went fast, using the dry wash again, came around the south end of the barn before Halsey's group had finished the particular kind of staring contest that men get into when both sides are recalculating. Put himself behind the water trough beside the barn's south wall, good cover, good angle on the main group, and he was there for 3 seconds before Halsey looked to his right and saw him. Arithmetic changed visibly in Halsey's face. He'd come with 14 men expecting 1 old rancher. He'd lost 3 to the creek. Whether they were gone or just disarmed, he didn't know, which was its own problem. He'd lost 2 on the ridge. 2 more in his main group were unsteady. He had at best 7 reliable men facing 2 armed positions, with no clear sense of what other variables he hadn't accounted for. "Tell me your number," Halsey said, and the question was directed at Cole. "Wrong question," Cole said. "What's the right question?" "Whether you want to ride out of here." Cole held his position behind the trough. "You can. Right now. Take your men, get back on the road, tell Vale his offer was declined again. Nobody here has to die today." Halsey's jaw moved. He was looking at Cole and looking at Silas and running numbers that weren't coming out the way he'd expected. "Vale will send more men," Halsey said. "I know it. More than 2 people can handle." "That's a tomorrow problem," Cole said. "Today's problem is simpler." He let a moment pass. "Ride out, Halsey." It wasn't an instant decision. Men like Halsey didn't make instant decisions. They had pride and they had professional reputation, and both of those things pushed against backing down in front of their own men. Cole watched him work through it. He watched the 7 riders behind Halsey watching Halsey. He watched Silas stand in the open with a rifle he wasn't pointing at anyone yet. Halsey put his rifle back in its scabbard. It was a small movement, deliberate and visible, and it meant something specific to everyone watching. Cole felt the tension in the group shift. Not break, but shift, like a rope going from taut to merely firm. "We'll be back," Halsey said. "I expect so," Cole said. Halsey turned his horse. His men fell in behind him without being told, which was either discipline or relief, probably some of both. They went back up the road toward Brackwell at a controlled pace, not running, because men like that didn't run, but moving with purpose toward somewhere else. Cole watched them until they'd rounded the first bend. Then he went and found the 3 creek riders and untied the one he'd secured. He cut the cord rather than fumbling with the knot, because he was tired and his hands were cold, and told all 3 of them to collect their horses and follow the road north. Didn't argue. People usually didn't when the argument was clearly over. 2 ridgemen had already gone. Cole had given them the opportunity to do so before he'd come down, which was a decision he'd make again if asked. Keeping prisoners complicated things, and he needed to think. Walked back to the barn. Silas was sitting on the fence rail outside the barn door. He had his rifle across his knees, and he was looking at the road, watching the last of the riders disappear, and his face had the particular flat quality it got when he was working through something that hadn't gone exactly as planned. "Came out of the barn," Cole said. "One of them was starting to work around to the south wall. I'd have lost my angle. You could have moved inside." "Could have, I didn't want to." Silas looked at him. I'm not going to hide in my own barn, Cole. I'll stand in the open before I do that. Cole didn't argue with it. He understood it, didn't entirely agree with it, but he understood it, and there was a difference. Drove them off, Silas said. For now, for now. Cole sat down on the fence rail beside him. Legs were reminding him about the cold and the crawling and the brief ugly tangle on the ridge. Halsey will report to Vale. Vale will know the number didn't work, and he'll know why. He'll send more. Or he'll come himself. Cole looked at the road. He was already in Brackwell, according to your source. That means he's close. He came to watch this end, not to negotiate. Silas was quiet. So it didn't end, he said. It didn't end the way he planned. Cole rubbed his hand together. Cold was in his joints now, the particular ache of a man who'd been lying in a shallow dirt hole for several hours. Which means he's angry. Angry men make faster decisions than patient ones. Is that good or bad for us? Depends on what he decides. Cole looked at the ridge. We need to reset those positions, and I want to find where he was watching from. There was a place on the road, before the first bend, where a man with a glass could see the whole approach. He was there, or close to it. You think he saw all of it? I think he saw enough to know that what he brought wasn't enough. Cole stood up. His knees reported their opinion of this decision. Part that worries me. Silas stood too slower, with more ceremony. He'd made it through the morning, and the relief of that had not yet fully arrived. He was still running on the particular kind of cold focus that combat produced, and Cole recognized it because he was running on it himself. It's coffee, Silas said. There's always coffee. That's not a complaint. They went inside. The lamp was still going in the main room, and the fire had burned down but not out, and Cole put 2 pieces of wood on it while Silas filled cups from the pot on the iron stove. The ordinary rhythm of it, fire and coffee, and a table to sit at, had a different quality after a morning like that. It wasn't comfort exactly. It was more like a reminder that ordinary things still existed, which was its own kind of important. Cole wrapped his hands around the cup and let the heat work on his fingers. Tell me about the water rights document, he said. Original one. Lockbox. Under the floor in the back room. Silas sat. Why? Because if Vale can't take the land by force, the next move is legal. He'll go to the county judge with something, a forged survey, a disputed filing date, a technicality nobody noticed. He's got lawyers. He's done this before. Cole looked at the map on the wall. We need copies of that document somewhere. He can't get to them. Brackwell's not safe. He has the judge. Not Brackwell. San Antonio. The land commissioner's office. Cole thought about it. Of anyone you trust to ride that? Silas was quiet for a moment. My neighbor to the east, what used to be my neighbor, before he sold. His brother-in-law, Tom Kress, still lives in Brackwell, runs the hardware store. Stubborn man, honest. He's been furious about what happened to his sister's family. He paused. He'd ride it. Can he leave today if I ask him? We need him to leave today. Cole set down his cup. And we need to do something else, Silas. Something that's going to require you to trust me on the reason before I explain the whole reason. Silas looked at him. When has that arrangement ever gone well for me, he said, which was not a question. This morning, probably. Silas made a sound that acknowledged the point. What do you need? A rider, Kress, or someone else needs to go to the families Vale pushed out. One's in tents east of Brackwell, the ones who sold under pressure. They need to know what happened this morning, not a rumor, the truth. That Vale's men came, that they were turned back, that there's still a fight here. Silas frowned. Why? Because Vale's power is based partly on the story that resisting him is pointless. People here this morning told straight 14 men sent and turned around without a single fatality on our side. Story changes. Cole looked at the map. And because when he comes back, and he will come back, I want him to know that what happens here will be known. That there are people watching. That this isn't a remote operation in the dark anymore. Silas sat with that for a long time. You think that'll slow him down, he said. No, Cole said honestly. I think it'll make what comes next matter to more people. I think when this is done, one way or another, the record of it should exist somewhere besides whatever Vale's company puts in the county files. Goldman looked at the fire. Something was working through him. Not emotion exactly, but the weight of it. Particular gravity of a man who has spent 30 years trying to hold something together and can feel, for the first time, the possibility that other people might be watching, might be counting, might be something other than frightened bystanders. I'll send for Tom Kress, Silas said. Good, Cole. Silas looked at him. 3 men from the creek, the 2 from the ridge. Going to report exactly what happened. Yes. So Vale will know about you. Cole nodded. He probably already does, Cole said. My name's not unknown in this part of Texas. And if he looked into who my father was and where my father spent his time. He stopped. He'll know. That makes you a target. I was a target before I crossed the river. Cole said it without drama, which was the only honest way to say it. Bounty on me isn't new. It just became relevant. Silas stared at him. There's a bounty on you. There has been. Since Laredo, about 18 months ago, when I stopped Vale's first operation before I knew it was Vale. He picked up his coffee again. A man was being pushed off water rights by a company I later learned was a subsidiary of Consolidated Western. I resolved the situation, and the company put a paper on me. I didn't know it was Vale, specifically until I started following the thread. Silas put down his cup with more weight than the action required. Might have mentioned that, he said. I'm mentioning it now. Changes things. It changes the size of what's coming, Cole said. Not whether it needs to be dealt with. Silas looked at him for a long time with those faded winter sky eyes. Your father, he said finally, was exactly this aggravating. Cole almost smiled. So I've heard, he said. The rest of the morning was work, the kind of grim, methodical work that follows a fight that ended without fully ending. Cole walked the positions they'd used and noted what had worked and what hadn't. The hollow east of the creek had been good. The fence line approach had been risky. He'd crossed open ground for a few seconds, and that window would be narrower if the men came better prepared next time. Ridge positions were going to need to be addressed differently, because Vale would know about them now and would post counters on the high ground to the north if he was smart. And everything Cole had seen suggested that whatever else Gideon Vale was, he was smart. Found where 3 rifles had been dropped by the creek riders. He collected them, cleaned the dirt off them, and put them in the barn with the others. The ammunition was ammunition. Silas rode to Brackwell in the late morning, taking the south road to stay off the main route, and came back 2 hours later with Tom Kress riding beside him. Kress was a wide-shouldered man in his late 40s with a carpenter's hands and the particular kind of controlled anger that comes from watching something unjust happen to people you love and being unable to stop it. He listened to Cole's account of the morning without interrupting. When Cole finished, Kress sat with it for a moment. 14 men, Kress said. 14, Cole confirmed. You turned them around. We turned them around. Silas carried most of the weight at the barn. Kress looked at Silas, who was pouring coffee at the stove and not making a thing of it. I'll ride to San Antonio, Kress said, and I'll talk to the families on the way back. He paused. There are 8 of them that I know of families that lost property to Vale's company. Some of them are in the tents east of Brackwell. A couple more are scattered. Tell them what happened, Cole said. Tell them accurate. Don't make it bigger than it was. It's already big enough, Kress said. Tell them accurate anyway. People can smell exaggeration, and it discredits everything around it. Kress left within the hour. Cole watched him go from the porch, the same porch where he'd sat the night before in the dark, waiting for the sky to change. Afternoon had come on warm for November, a thin, dry warmth that the Texas border country sometimes produced in the fall, like a last argument against the coming cold. He stood there for a while. Got behind him, inside the house, he could hear Silas moving around, the sound of the old man's boots on the plank floor, the scrape of a chair, rattle of the stove lid, ordinary sounds. The sounds of a man doing things in his own house on his own land, which was the thing that Vale wanted to end, and which was, when you stripped everything else away, the whole of what this was about. Cole heard it. He heard the fire in the floor and the old man's careful, deliberate movement, and he thought about water rights and burned deeds and a tin cup on an empty porch rail. Then he went inside to help Silas figure out what 14 men would look like the second time, and whether 2 men and a dog and a cabinet full of rifles could hold together long enough for the story to matter. What he didn't know yet, what neither of them could have known from inside the walls of that house, with the afternoon going mild and the road quiet, was that Tom Kress would make it to San Antonio. The copies would be filed. Dee and the families would hear the account of the morning, and something would shift in them. Something that had been pressed down by fear and loss and the particular despair of watching legal paper used as a weapon against people who trusted legal paper. And he didn't know, not yet, that Gideon Vale had watched the whole morning from a rise on the north road through a brass telescope, and that what he'd seen had done something to his face that the man riding beside him had never seen it do before. Not rage, not calculation, something colder than both. Vale had put the telescope away without a word and turned his horse south. back toward the larger ranch he was using as his operational headquarters. He had not spoken to anyone for the remainder of the ride. And the man riding beside him, one of his 4 close guns, a man named Terrell, who'd been in Vale's employ for 6 years and thought he knew him, had felt the silence as a physical thing and had kept his own counsel all the way back. Because what Gideon Vale was doing in that silence was not planning 14 men again. It was planning something that required a different kind of arithmetic entirely, and the weight of that arithmetic was going to arrive at Callaway Ford before Cole Mercer had finished figuring out how to survive it. Afternoon held. The road stayed quiet. Patch slept on the porch in the thin November warmth, as if the morning had been a minor inconvenience, and the evening promised nothing more complicated than supper. Cole cleaned his rifle. He checked his ammunition. He looked at the map on the wall with Silas's pencil marks and his own additions, and he thought about what a man with Vale's resources would do when the first move failed. He thought about the sharps in the cabinet. He thought about Silas saying, 400 yards, dependable. I've taken it to 5 on a still day. He sat with that for a long time. Outside, the light was going gold and then amber, and then the first cool blue of early evening, somewhere on a south road that Cole couldn't see from where he sat. Gideon Vale was making a decision that would arrive here with the force of something that couldn't be argued with. And in the kitchen, Silas Rourke put a pot on for supper and called out to ask whether Cole wanted salt pork or beans. Cole called back that either was fine. And for a few minutes, the house felt like just a house again worn and lived in and solid, the way things feel when they've been held on to long enough to matter. It was not going to last. Cole knew that. He held on to the few minutes anyway. Supper was salt pork and beans, and half a pan of cornbread that Silas made without measuring anything, the way men who've cooked alone for years learned to do. They ate at the table, with the map still pinned to the wall and the lamp between them and the fire going steady. Neither of them talked much, because the morning had used up a certain kind of energy that food could restore but conversation couldn't. Patch got the pan drippings and considered this an acceptable outcome for a difficult day. Cole washed the dishes. Silas didn't tell him to and didn't thank him. He just watched it happen with the mild surprise of a man who hadn't expected it, and then he picked up a cloth and dried what Cole washed. And they worked through it in the same silence they'd been keeping all evening. When it was done, Cole sat back down at the table and looked at the map. "He's not going to send Halsey again," he said. "No." Silas settled into his chair with the careful arrangement of a man whose body had opinions about wooden chairs after a long day. "Halsey failed. Vale doesn't keep men who fail. He'll send someone else or he'll come himself. Was watching this morning, I figured, which means he knows what we've got roofly. 2 men, 2 positions, good angles on the approach." Cole traced the road on the map with one finger. "What he doesn't know is what we do next, whether we dig in or move. We doing either?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that," he said. Silas looked at him in the particular way he had, not waiting exactly, more like creating a space where a thought could arrive without being rushed. "Vale's advantage is numbers and money," Cole said. "He can replace men. He can hire better. He can come at this from directions we haven't planned for, and he has the resources to do it indefinitely." He looked at the map. "Our advantage is that we know this land, and he doesn't, and that we're still here, which is the thing he wasn't counting on. Count on it now. Yes, so the land advantage shrinks." Cole sat back. "Which means the longer we sit here waiting, the worse our position gets." Silas was quiet for a moment. "You're saying we should take it to him," he said. "I'm saying we should think about it." "Cole," the old man's voice had something in it. "I'm 71 years old. I can hold this ranch. Can't write a campaign." "I know." Cole looked at him. "I'm not asking you to." The silence between them had a different texture after that. Something was being said that wasn't quite words yet, and both of them could feel it coming, the way you feel a shift in barometric pressure before you can name what it means. Outside, the wind had picked up. It came off the caprock cold and direct, and the house held it out the way adobe houses did, the thick walls absorbing the pressure and giving back warmth. Cole could hear it moving through the cedar brake to the south, and along the fence lines he'd walked twice in the dark. He was thinking about tomorrow. He was also thinking about the night. He'd learned, over years of working in contested country, that the interval between a failed operation and the next one was often the most dangerous time. Vale's men had ridden back to wherever they were staging. They'd report. Vale would react, and that reaction, the specific shape of it, would be formulated tonight, in whatever place Vale was using as his headquarters, and it would be set in motion before morning. Which left the night. Cole had been in enough of these situations to know that his instinct was right, and his instinct said that the night was not safe. He stood up from the table. "I'm going to do a perimeter walk," he said. Silas looked at him. "It's full dark." "I know. You've been awake since before yesterday's midnight." "I know that too." The old man studied him for a moment, and whatever he saw in Cole's face settled the argument before it started. "Take the short rifle," Silas said. "Not the sharps. The short one's faster in the dark." Cole took the rifle Silas meant, a Winchester that sat clean and ready in the cabinet, and went out. Dark was full and cold, and the wind moved through it with a particular sound that the Texas brush country made in November, a dry rattling whisper from the dead grass and the cedar branches. Cole moved through it the way he'd learned to move through darkness, slowly, stopping often, using his ears more than his eyes. Walked the south fence first, then the east. Then he came around north of the barn and stood in the shadow of the barn wall for 10 minutes just listening. Nothing wrong. Nothing obviously wrong. He went to the ridge anyway. Took him 40 minutes to reach the top of the ridge from the north approach, which was longer and harder than the pouch, but which he used because if someone was on the ridge already, they'd expect him from the south. Came up through scrub cedar and loose rock and went to his belly for the last 50 yards, and he lay on the cold ridge top and looked out over the country below. Ranch was a collection of dim shapes in the dark, the house with its single lamp window, the barn darker, the creek invisible below its banks. Road was a pale thread leading north. He could see nothing on it. Looked for a long time. He almost missed it. Almost. It was the kind of thing you could look directly at and not see because it wasn't movement and it wasn't light. It was the absence of something, a section of the northern tree line where the wind was doing something slightly different than it was doing on either side of it. A small wrongness that his eyes passed over twice before something in the back of his head said, "Go back." Went back. He looked at that section of tree line for 2 full minutes. Then he saw the horse. Not the whole horse, just the edge of a dark shape where no horse should be, too still for a deer, too large for anything else. Beside it, barely visible against the dark brush, the outline of a man standing, watching the ranch. Cole came off the ridge the way he'd come up carefully, without hurry, because hurry made noise and noise made decisions for you. Came around the base of the ridge and moved along the fence line east until he was approaching the tree line from the side rather than the front. Still 40 yards away when the shape by the horse resolved into a man, and the man resolved into someone he'd seen before. It wasn't one of Halsey's riders. The build was wrong, leaner, taller, with a stillness that wasn't the stillness of a frightened man or a hired hand. This was the stillness of someone doing deliberate surveillance. Cole closed the distance to 20 yards and stopped. "Been there an hour," he said, keeping his voice low. Man turned fast, but not panicked-controlled, which told Cole something. His hand went to his hip and stopped there. "Don't," Cole said. The hand stopped. They looked at each other in the dark. "I'm not Vale's man," the stranger said. That's what Vale's man would say. "My name is Del Reardon. I was a deputy marshal out of Uvalde until 4 months ago, when Vale's company filed a complaint against me and the judge removed me from office." A pause. Complaint was that I'd been investigating Consolidated Western Lands filings without authorization, which I had been. Cole held his position. "How'd you find this place?" "Tom Kress. I was in Brackwell when he came through. He told me what happened this morning." Another pause. "I've been building a case against Vale for 7 months. I've got documents, copies of altered survey filings, affidavits from 3 families who were coerced into signing deeds they didn't understand. What I don't have is someone who can hold Vale in place long enough for any of it to matter." Cole stood in the dark with the wind moving around him and looked at this man and thought about the various ways this could be exactly what it appeared to be and the various ways it couldn't. "Come to the house," he said finally. "Leave the horse tied there." "Why leave the horse?" "Because I want to see you walk in without being able to ride out fast. If you're who you say you are, that won't bother you." "The moment." "Fair enough," Reardon said. They came in through the back of the barn. Cole went first, and Reardon followed, and Silas was standing in the barn doorway with a rifle when they got there, because Silas had apparently decided that Cole's perimeter walk was taking long enough to warrant paying attention. "Found him in the north tree line," Cole said. "He says he's Del Reardon, ex-deputy out of Uvalde." Silas looked at Reardon. He looked for long enough that Reardon stood still and let himself be looked at, which was again something Cole noted. "I knew a Reardon family in Uvalde," Silas said. 30 years ago. Hardware business. My grandfather, Reardon said. Sold the business in 71. Silas kept looking at him. Come inside, he said. They sat at the table, 3 men now around the lamp, and Reardon opened a saddlebag he'd been carrying and put papers on the table. Cole looked at them without touching them at first, then picked them up one by one. They were what Reardon said they were. Survey filings with dates that didn't align with the properties they were supposed to describe. Deed transfer for a property in the Pecos cutoff area that bore a signature Cole compared against an affidavit from the same family. The handwriting was different in ways that weren't subtle. Letter on Consolidated Western Land Stationery that referenced properties not yet acquired in language that assumed they would be, with methods of acquisition that were described in the kind of corporate euphemism that meant something specific to anyone reading carefully. Where did you get this letter? Cole said, one of Vale's clerks. Man named Hobson. He worked for the land company for 2 years before he understood what he was part of. Came to me 6 months ago. Reardon's voice was flat and factual. He's not in this county anymore. I moved him before Vale's people could figure out he'd talked. Vale knows someone talked? He knows something went sideways with his filings. He doesn't know who or what specifically. Yet. Reardon looked at the papers on the table. Problem is jurisdiction. The county judge is Vale's. Circuit judge 2 counties over is not, but getting anything to him requires going through channels that Vale has people watching. He paused. And it requires someone to testify in person, which requires surviving long enough to do it. Silas poured coffee. He put a cup in front of Reardon without asking. What do you need from us? Silas said. Time, Reardon said. And a place to work from that isn't in Vale's reach. If I can get these documents to Austin to the State Land Commissioner's office, which is what I've been working toward, Vale's operation here collapses. The land company will be investigated. The forged filings will surface. Families have a path to recovery. Austin is a long way, Cole said. It was close. Yes. Cole looked at the papers again. He thought about Tom Kress, already on the road south with the water rights copies. Thought about the families in the tents east of Brackwell. He thought about 14 men and the cold arithmetic of what came next. You can stay here tonight, he said to Reardon. We'll talk more in the morning about Austin. Reardon nodded. He drank his coffee without commenting on its quality, which given the hour and the circumstances was exactly the right response. Gave him the small room off the back of storage room that Silas had put a cot in at some point for reasons that had made sense at the time, and Cole went back to the main room and sat down across from Silas. You believe him, Silas said. It wasn't quite a question. I believe the papers, Cole said. I haven't decided about him yet. Grandfather really did have a hardware business in Uvalde. Franklin Reardon. I bought barrel staves from him in '59. Doesn't make the grandson trustworthy. No. Silas looked at his coffee. It makes him less likely to be an invention. Cole nodded slowly. He looked at the map on the wall. He looked at the lamp burning between them. Get some sleep, Cole said. Going to watch until about 2. Then wake me up and I'll finish the night. Silas looked at him with an expression that was as close to argument as the old man got anymore. A sort of compressed patience, the look of a man who has things to say and has decided to say none of them. Fine, Silas said. He stood. He looked at Cole for a moment. Your father used to do the same thing. Take the watch himself and tell me to sleep. Like I was something that needed protecting. You are something that needs protecting. I am something that has been protecting itself since before you were born. I know. Cole looked at him. Sleep anyway, Silas went. Cole sat at the table with the lamp and the map and the quiet sound of the wind, and he went through Reardon's papers again. Slowly this time, without hurrying. He had the kind of mind that retained documents, not photographic, nothing like that, but structured. He could hold a chain of events in his head and move through it and find the place where it didn't quite fit together, and he did that now with what Reardon had given him, testing the shape of it. It was real. He was increasingly sure of that. The specific weight of the forgeries, the way the survey alterations were done, the corporate language of the letter, the grain of the paper, and the ink these were not things you manufactured to deceive someone for one night in a remote ranch house. The effort involved in fabricating them would exceed any reasonable purpose. The affidavits had the quality of genuine testimony, halting, incomplete, inconsistent in small ways that actual memory produced and deliberate construction avoided. Vale had been doing this for a long time, longer than his arrival in this county. Cole thought about that. Thought about a man who built a machinery for taking things, who traveled from county to county and executed the same operations with the same legal infrastructure, the bought judges, coerced signings, forged filings, and who had been doing it long enough that the machinery was efficient. 14 men wasn't clumsy. It was calibrated. Vale had learned through practice exactly how much force was usually required. Miscalculated here. The question was what recalibration looked like. Cole was still thinking about that when he heard it. Not from the road, not from the north, from the south. A single sound, brief and muffled by distance. That might have been the wind in the cedar brake, and might have been something else. He was out of the chair before he'd finished deciding which it was, because the cost of being wrong about the wind was nothing, and the cost of being wrong about the other thing was everything. He went out the back of the house, through the kitchen, low and fast, and he was at the corner of the barn when he heard the second sound closer now. Unmistakable. A horse, moving carefully. More than one. He'd moved Rourke and Silas's horses to the cedar brake south, which was, he realized with the specific cold clarity of a mistake arriving, where whoever had scouted this operation would know to look for them. Because a ranch without horses visible was a ranch where someone had hidden horses. It'd come around south. While Halsey's group had come north as the obvious approach, Vale had sent a smaller contingent around to take the horses. Cole reached the south fence in 20 seconds. 3 men. Could see them now. They'd gotten into the cedar brake, and they had Rourke on a lead line already. Rourke, who was trying to communicate his position on this through body language and was being ignored. But the other 2 horses were being gathered. He had about 4 seconds before they cleared the brake with the horses. The fence in one move and closed the distance at a run, and the first man heard him at 10 yards and turned, and they collided before either of them had fully sorted out the angles. It was ugly close quarters work. Kind Cole hated too many variables. Too easy to have something go wrong, and what went wrong was the fence. Rourke, startled by the collision, shied hard into the cedar brake, and the lead line jerked out of the man's grip. Second man came around fast with a pistol. Cole was on the ground from the collision, rolling, and the shot went overhead high and to the right, which meant the man was better with a rifle than a pistol, or was rattled, or both. Cole came up behind the first man and used him briefly as a reason why the second man couldn't shoot again without solving a problem first. The third man had the other 2 horses. Nay, he was the one who made the decision that mattered. Instead of coming in, he turned both horses and went south at a run, leaving his 2 colleagues in a situation that had changed character significantly. Cole put the first man on the ground in a way that removed him from participation. He looked at the second man. "I don't want to shoot you," he said. He was breathing hard. His left shoulder had hit the fence post during the collision and was reporting its opinion. Second man looked at him. He looked at his colleague on the ground. Looked at the pistol in his own hand. He put the pistol down. "Smart," Cole said. He secured the second man's hands with the cord he always carried. He went through 2 of these encounters before he'd started carrying 3 cords, and now he thought maybe 4, and checked the first man, who was breathing and would have a significant headache later. And then he went into the brake and found Rourke standing 20 feet in among the cedars, lead line dragging, still expressing displeasure but willing to be collected. Brought Rourke back to the fence and tied him to a post. His shoulder hurt in the specific way that meant bruised bone rather than anything worse. He stood in the dark behind the barn and felt his heart rate come back down and thought about the third man and the 2 horses going south and what that meant. It meant Vale knew the horses were there. It meant someone had scouted the cedar brake specifically, which meant someone had watched the ranch long enough to see Cole move the horses the night before, which meant there had been scouts before Halsey arrived. Before yesterday, Vale had been watching this place longer than Silas knew. Cole stood with that for a moment. Then he went inside and woke Silas. The old man was awake before Cole's hand touched his shoulder frontier reflex, the kind you either developed or you didn't, and Cole told him in low sentences what had happened. Silas listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, Silas sat on the edge of his bed for a moment with his hands on his knees. 2 horses, Silas said. He got them. Yes, those were good horses. I know. Silas looked at the floor. How is Rourke? Fine. The old man almost smiled. It was brief and tired, but it was there. What does this change? He said. They know our south flank now. They know where we had the horses. They know we're watching at night because we responded. Cole thought through it. They didn't get what they came for, which might frustrate Vale, or it might tell him something useful about how we operate, and I don't know which of those is worse. Both, Silas said. Both, Cole agreed. They brought the second captive inside bound, seated against the kitchen wall, not particularly talkative. Reardon appeared in the doorway of his room within a minute of them coming in, already alert, which Cole filed away as a useful data point. What happened? Reardon said. Cole told him. Reardon looked at the bound man with an expression that was recognizing something. He's one of Vale's close four, Reardon said. His name is Terrell. The others are Birch, Cade, and one they call Doak. Terrell is the most capable of the four. Terrell said nothing. He looked at the wall with the specific expression of a man who has decided that silence is the only currency left to him. He's here himself, Cole said. Vale, he was already close, Reardon said. If he sent Terrell for the horses personally, he's not running operations from a distance anymore. Cole looked at Terrell. Watching himself, Terrell kept looking at the wall. How close? Cole said to him. Nothing, Terrell. Cole sat down across from him. I'm not going to threaten you, and I'm not going to make you a deal. I just want to know what we're actually dealing with. How close is Vale? A long silence, then surprisingly 4 miles north. Old Castor property. Cole looked at Reardon. Reardon's expression confirmed it. He knew the Castor property. That's a big ranch, Reardon said quietly. Lots of outbuildings. Place that could house a significant number of men. Cole nodded slowly. 4 miles. He sat with that and turned it over and examined what it meant. Vale had positioned himself 4 miles from the target of his operation, which was not the behavior of a man running a remote land acquisition scheme. It was the behavior of a man who intended to be present for the resolution. Who wanted, maybe needed, to watch it end. The profile of that was informative. Cole thought about the letter Reardon had shown him. The corporate language, the property described as not yet acquired, the methodical architecture of a man who'd built his operation like a machine. Again, and he thought about the brass telescope and the cold thing that Terrell had seen in Vale's face when the 14 men came back without finishing what they'd been sent to do. Some men built machines to make themselves feel powerful. Some men built machines because power was the only thing that quieted something inside them that couldn't otherwise be quieted. Second kind was harder to deal with, because the first kind would cut their losses when the math turned against them, and the second kind wouldn't. Because for them, the math was never really the point. Cole thought Vale was the second kind. He said none of this out loud. Stood up and looked at Silas. We need to talk about what comes next, he said. Not tonight, you need sleep and so do I, but first light. Silas nodded. They put Terrell in the storage room with Reardon. Reardon made no objection to sharing the space, which said something, and Cole took the second half of the night watch from the porch. It was the coldest part of the night now, the hour before dawn, that pulled every degree of warmth out of the ground, and the walls and the sitting human body. Cole pulled his coat tight and put his hat down over his ears and watched the road and the tree lines and the ridge. Nothing came. The silence was the particular silence of a space between things, the way a story pauses between what has already happened and what is being decided. Vale was 4 miles north in a big ranch house on stolen land, and he was deciding. Cole was here, on the porch of a ranch that still belonged to the man who'd built it, and he was deciding too. He thought about his father. He did this more than he admitted, turned his father's memory over in his hands like a stone he was still learning the weight of. Frank Mercer had been a specific kind of man, the kind who appeared in places where things had already gone wrong and either made them right or made them worse, and usually couldn't predict which it was going to be before he started. Cole had inherited the same instinct and the same uncertainty about it, and he'd spent years trying to determine whether the inheritance was worth carrying. He thought he knew the answer now. He wasn't certain, but he thought he knew. Sky at 4 in the morning was absolutely black, and then at 4:30 it was almost absolutely black with the faintest suggestion of something coming. Cole watched it change degree by degree, and he thought about water rights and burned deeds, and the families in the tents east of Brackwell, and the 2 horses that had gone south in the night. Thought about Silas inside, sleeping because Cole was watching. Thought about the sharps in the cabinet, wrapped in oilcloth. Was still thinking about all of it when the sound came. Not from the road this time. Not from the south. From inside the house. It was a sound Cole identified before he'd fully processed it. The specific quality of a man's weight hitting the floor, a heavy, deliberate sound without the randomness of a fall. He was off the porch and through the door in 2 seconds, rifle up, and he crossed the main room and went through the kitchen doorway in a low, fast movement, and the lamp in the kitchen was still lit, and in its light he saw 2 things simultaneously. Reardon, against the far wall, hands raised. Silas on the floor. Cole went to his knees beside the old man before he'd made any conscious decision to do so. Silas was on his side, one hand pressed to his left shoulder. When Cole moved the hand, there was blood dark and significant, soaking through the shirt and the long underwear beneath it. Window above the dry sink was open. Cole registered that with one part of his mind while the rest of him was already working. Someone had come through the window in the darkness between Cole's porch position and the back of the house, a blind spot he'd maintained as a known risk and just now paid for, and had gotten through the kitchen before either Cole or Reardon reached him. He was already gone. The open window said gone. Cole pressed his own hand over Silas's shoulder and looked at the wound. Gee. The bullet had gone through the outer part of the shoulder, missing the center mass, missing the major structures Cole knew about from years of dealing with this kind of thing in the field. Through was still through, and the old man had lost a significant amount of blood already, and 71-year-old men didn't repair the same way 30-year-old men did. I heard him too late, Reardon said from the wall. His voice was tight with something controlled. He was already past me. Terrell? Cole said. No, Terrell's still... Reardon looked at the storage room door, which was standing open. Gone too. Different way. The lock on the outside door, he got the cord loose. Cole kept pressure on Silas's shoulder and looked at the old man's face. Silas was conscious. His eyes were open and his jaw was set in the particular way of a man absorbing pain that he's not going to give voice to, and his free hand found Cole's arm and gripped it with a strength that was something more than physical. I'm here, Cole said. I know you are. Silas's voice was rougher than usual. Not weak, just rougher, the grain of it exposed. How bad? Through and through. Upper shoulder. You'll live if I can get it clean. Stop arguing. Where does Reardon know about? Silas looked past Cole to where Reardon was crouching down now, moving to help. Something passed between the old man's eyes. Assessment. Decision. There's a medical kit under the floorboard in the back room, Silas said. Same board as the lock box, left side. Cole looked at Reardon. Get it. Reardon went. Cole kept his hand on Silas's shoulder and looked at the open window above the dry sink. Cold air was coming through it steadily. Somewhere in the dark outside, a man who'd shot Silas Rourke was moving back toward wherever he'd come from, toward Vale's position 4 miles north, and carrying information about what he'd accomplished. Cole registered the rage of that. He acknowledged it and set it aside, because Silas was on his kitchen floor, and setting things aside was what the moment required. Came for me specifically, Silas said. It was not a question. Probably. To remove me from the equation, yes. Silas made a sound that in a different context might have been a laugh. Sent one man, for me, a capable man. Cole looked at him. Stop being flattered and lie still. I'm on a kitchen floor, Cole. I'm not sure what being still looks like from here. Reardon came back with the kit, a tin box, well stocked, better stocked than Cole had expected. Needle and catgut, clean cloth, a bottle of carbolic that was 3/4 full. Cole worked on the wound while Reardon held the lamp closer, and Silas lay on the kitchen floor and looked at the ceiling and did not make a sound, which was the bravest thing Cole had seen in a long time, because he knew exactly how much it hurt. When it was done cleaned, closed as well as Cole could manage, bound tightly to hold everything in its place, Silas looked different. Not diminished. Older, maybe. More exposed. Like the part of him that had been armored by sheer forward momentum had been briefly stripped away to show what was underneath. Still considerable. Can you walk? Cole said. I can walk. Then let's get you to the bed. They did, Reardon taking one side and Cole the other. Silas moved slowly and set his jaw and walked without leaning on either of them more than was absolutely necessary, which was the only way he was ever going to do it. Got him to the bed. He sat on the edge of it for a moment, looking at the floor. Cole, he said. Yeah, I need to tell you something. Father. He looked up at him. Something I've been carrying since before you came, and I was going to wait for the right time. But I'm starting to think the right time has poor aim. Cole sat on the chair beside the bed. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees and looked at the old man. Tell me, he said. Silas looked at his bound shoulder for a moment. The window. At the map on the far wall, visible through the open doorway. Frank didn't die by accident, Silas said. He didn't die in a random confrontation. He died because someone told a man named Karras where Frank was going to be and when. He paused. Karras worked for a land company out of Austin, a company that no longer exists under that name. Cole held very still. That company, Silas said, was the predecessor to Consolidated Western Land. The lamp burned. The wind pushed at the window Cole hadn't closed yet. In the kitchen, Reardon sat at the table with Reardon's papers and the particular respectful silence of a man who understood he was present at something private. Cole sat with what Silas had said and let it arrive fully. Let the shape of it become clear. Vale, he said. Not a question. I couldn't prove it. I've never been able to prove it. Silas looked at him steadily. The company was his, operating under a different name. And the pattern of what happened to Frank, the information that got him killed, was consistent with how Vale eliminates people who know too much about his filings. A pause. I've been sitting on this for 2 years, since I first heard Vale's name in connection with what's happening in this county. Cole stood up. He walked to the window in the main room, not the one that had been used, the front one, and looked out at the dark that was no longer quite as full dark as it had been. Guy was beginning to consider its options. He thought about his father. Thought about 14 men and a brass telescope and a cold expression on a face he hadn't yet seen in person. He thought about Marta Yelin in her nightgown and a deed used for kindling and a child's tin cup on an empty porch. Thought about water. He stood at the window for a long time. When he came back to the doorway of the bedroom, Silas was watching him from the bed with the careful attention of a man who has just handed someone a weight and is watching to see how they carry it. "You should have told me when I arrived," Cole said. "I know. It would have changed what I was thinking about." "I know that too." Silas held his gaze. "That's why I didn't tell you. I needed you thinking about the ranch, about this fight, not about your father." Cole looked at him, and now he said, "Now I think you need to know the whole of it," Silas said. "Because Vale is 4 miles away, and whatever you decide to do next, you should do it with the full picture." Cole put his hand on the doorframe. He felt the solidity of the wood under his palm roof, real, the kind of thing that gets built once and stands until something comes to take it down. "Sharps," he said. Silas nodded. "It's yours," the old man said. "Was always going to be yours. I just needed to find the right time to say so." His voice had lost none of its steadiness, but there was something underneath it now, the particular quality of a man who has been carrying a secret for a long time and has finally set it down. "Your father would have wanted you to have it. He would have wanted you to use it for exactly the kind of thing you're about to use it for." Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he went to the cabinet. He unwrapped the sharps and held it and felt the weight of it, the specific balance of something made with care over time, something that a man had worked on across 6 years until it was exactly what he needed it to be. Walnut stock fit against his shoulder in a way that was not quite like any other rifle he'd ever held. He looked at the map on the wall, 4 miles north. Sky outside was beginning to go from absolute dark to the first colorless suggestion of morning. Not light yet, just the withdrawal of darkness, the way the sky breathed in before the day started. Cole stood at the cabinet with the sharps and thought about what the morning was going to require. In the bedroom, Silas looked at the ceiling with the careful stillness of a man managing pain, and his breathing was even, and his eyes were open. He said nothing else, because he had said what needed saying, and now the rest of it belonged to Cole. Reardon sat at the kitchen table with his papers and did not speak. Creek ran in the low ground behind the barn. The fence held where Cole had repaired it. Outside, the sky continued its slow decision about the day. The cold pressed at every window, and somewhere 4 miles north, Gideon Vale was being told what Terrell had accomplished in the dark. Somewhere in the count of what remained between now and resolution, a single shot from a Sharps rifle was waiting at a distance of 400 yards for a morning that was not quite here yet, but was undeniably coming. Sky made its decision around 5:30. Not dawn exactly, more like the sky's acknowledgement that darkness was no longer a position it could maintain. Gray came in flat and cold from the east, and Cole stood at the front window of Silas's house, with the Sharps leaning against the wall beside him, and watched the ranch take shape in the growing light. Barn. The fence line he'd repaired. The creek invisible in its low ground but audible, still running, still cold. He hadn't slept. He wasn't sure when he would again. Behind him, Reardon was at the table with his papers organized into 3 separate stacks. Each one weighted down with something from the kitchen, a cup, a spoon, a salt box, because the man apparently needed to see his work arranged before he could think about it clearly. Cole had noticed this about him. Reardon was a person who processed through order, who needed the physical world organized before the mental one could follow. It was not how Cole worked, but he recognized it as a legitimate way to operate. From the bedroom, Silas was quiet. Cole had checked on him twice in the last hour. The old man was sleeping, which was what his body needed, and what his stubbornness had resisted until the blood loss and the pain medication. A morphine preparation from the medical kit, older than Cole preferred, but still functional, had overruled the stubbornness. Color was reasonable. His breathing was steady. Wound was not ideal, but it was clean and closed, and Cole had done everything he knew how to do for it. Rest was Silas's constitution, which Cole was willing to bet on. Going to be all right, Reardon said. He hadn't looked up from his papers. Don't know that, Cole said. No, but you clearly think he will be, or you'd be sitting with him instead of standing at that window. Cole looked at him. Reardon still hadn't looked up. What are you working on? Cole said. Sequence of filings. Reardon moved one paper to a different stack. I want to establish the order in which Vale acquired properties, not by purchase date, which is what his company's records show, but by the actual sequence of the surveys. Surveys predate the purchases. If I can show that he surveyed properties before they were listed for sale, it establishes that he had foreknowledge of acquisition that wasn't public, which implies the acquisition was planned with methods that weren't legal. Cole considered this. That's thin. On its own, yes. Paired with the affidavits and the letter about methods. Not thin. Reardon finally looked up. I'm not trying to convict him in a border county court. I'm trying to build a record that survives whatever happens here and gives the land commissioner's office in Austin something to act on. Different threshold. How long to complete it? Reardon looked at his stacks. Another 4 hours, maybe, if I'm not interrupted. Cole looked back at the window. 4 hours. He thought about what 4 hours meant, given what Terrell had carried north in the dark. Vale now knew that Silas was shot. He knew Cole was still operational, still awake, still at the ranch. He knew Reardon was present, though he might not know who Reardon was. The man in the window had seen Reardon raise his hands, but whether Vale had enough information to identify him was uncertain. What Vale didn't know probably was the sharps. Cole thought about that. Silas had said 400 yards, dependable. He'd said he'd taken it to 5 on a still day. Morning was not still. There was a north wind, modest but consistent, the kind that required compensation but didn't make the shot impossible. Cole had shot at distance and wind before. He knew what corrections looked like. He also knew that the Castor property, 4 miles north, had an approach road that ran along a ridge before it descended to the main buildings. He knew this because Silas's map showed it, and because Reardon had confirmed it when Cole asked him about the property layout the night before. Ridge gave a man on horseback, or a man on foot, a clear view of the Castor Ranch buildings from approximately 430 yards. He'd been thinking about that ridge since Silas told him about Frank Mercer. Still thinking about it now. Reardon, he said. Yes. If Vale dies, what happens to the land company? Reardon was quiet for a moment. The company has a structure officers, a registered agent. Wouldn't automatically dissolve, he paused. But Vale is the operational center of it. The lawyers, county officials he's bought, men he's hired, their loyalty is to him personally, not to Consolidated Western Land as an institution. Without Vale directing it, the operation loses coherence. Another pause. And if he dies while Terrell's report is sitting in front of him, while whatever next move he was planning is still being planned, his people don't have a playbook. Burse. The bounty on me, Cole said. Who issued it formally? Vale, through the company. It's a private contract, not a lawful warrant. Reardon looked at him carefully. Vale is gone, the contract has no one to enforce it, and no one to pay out on it. It becomes a piece of paper. Cole nodded slowly. What are you thinking? Reardon said. I'm thinking about the families in the tents east of Brackwell, Cole said. I'm thinking about 8 families who lost property. And I'm thinking that burning Vale's operation down is more useful to them than any legal proceeding that takes 2 years and might get derailed by a judge he's already bought. Reardon put down the paper in his hand. What you're describing, Reardon said carefully, is not something I can be part of. I know. I have to be clear about that. You're clear, Cole said. I'm not asking you to be part of it. I'm asking you to finish your work and ride for Austin as soon as it's safe to do so. He looked at Reardon directly. The legal record you're building, that's the thing that gives the families a path after this is done. Without that, whatever else happens here is just one piece of contested frontier history that Vale's lawyers rewrite over the next decade. Reardon held his gaze for a long moment. And Silas, he said. Silas stays here. He can't ride. Cole glanced toward the bedroom. I need you to stay with him until he can sit a horse or until Tom Kress comes back from San Antonio. Whichever comes first. That leaves you alone. That's always been how this part works, Cole said. Went to the bedroom. Silas was awake. He was lying on his back, looking at the ceiling, with the particular alertness of a man who has been awake for a while and has been waiting without making a noise about it. The lamp on the bedside table was turned down low, and in its light the old man looked exactly his age, which was something Cole hadn't fully seen before. Morning had removed some layer. "You heard us," Cole said. "Not everything, some." Silas looked at him. "You're going to the Castor property?" "Yes." "On foot, Rourke can get me most of the way." "The last part on foot." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Wind is out of the north," he said. "Consistent this time of year. Probably 8 to 10 miles an hour. You'll want to compensate." "Left, I know. More than you think." The old man's voice had the patience of someone who has been precise about a specific thing for a very long time. Barrel has a particular tendency at that distance. You'll feel it in the first breath. Trust the first breath. Cole sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed. "Silas," he said. Stopped. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, and sat there for a moment with the not knowing, which was uncomfortable enough that he almost started talking about something practical. "I know," Silas said. "I haven't said anything. You don't need to." The old man looked at him steadily. I've been watching people try to say this particular thing since your father first brought you here when you were 9 years old. You made the same face then. You wanted to thank me for something I hadn't done yet, and you didn't know how." He paused. "Still don't." Cole looked at his hands. "He brought you here because he wanted you to know this place," Silas said. Frank said that some places teach a man what staying looks like. He wanted you to see it young, so you'd recognize it when you needed to. The old man's breathing shifted slightly. Not worse, just different. More deliberate. "I think you recognize it." Cole stood. Picked up the sharps from where it leaned against the wall inside the doorway. Gop. He checked it the way he'd checked it twice already, not because it needed checking again, but because checking things was a way of occupying the part of the mind that would otherwise do nothing useful. "You'll need to eat something before you go," Silas said. "I'm not hungry." "That's not what I said." Cole looked at him. "There's cornbread left," Silas said, "and I think there's some salt pork on the stove." Reardon probably didn't touch it, because he doesn't look like a man who eats before dawn. Cole almost said something. Instead, he went to the kitchen and ate standing at the counter, cold cornbread and cold salt pork. Because Silas was right that it mattered, and because arguing with a 71-year-old man with a bullet wound about breakfast was a specific kind of pointless. Reardon was still at the table with his papers. "I'll stay with him," Reardon said, without being asked again, "until Cress comes. If no one comes in 4 days, take the documents and go. Don't wait longer than that." Cole wrapped the remaining cornbread and put it on the shelf. "Take Silas if you can move him. If you can't, leave him enough water and enough of what's in the medical kit and get the documents to Austin." Reardon looked at him. "He won't like that instruction," Reardon said. "What do I tell him?" "Tell him Cole said so." Cole picked up the sharps. "He'll be angry enough that the anger will be useful." He went out to get Rourke. The gray gelding was in the barn, which was where Cole had moved him after the business in the cedar break. Rourke looked at Cole with the particular expression of a horse who has had an unusual night and has opinions about the trend of recent events. Cole saddled him and talked to him in low, even sentences about nothing specific: the weather, the road, general character of the morning, because Rourke responded well to the sound of a calm voice, even when the content was meaningless, because Cole needed the sound of his own calm voice at the moment regardless. He rode out the south gate, away from the main road, and took the long way north. Country between Silas's ranch and the Castor property was brushy, cut through with dry washes and cedar thickets that slowed travel but provided cover. Cole used them deliberately, staying off the open ground, watching the ridge lines. Morning was coming on colder than the night had been, which was the kind of thing Texas November did without apology warmth in the afternoon. Genuine cold by morning, found the difference, sharp enough to remind you that the season had turned. He stopped twice to listen. Nothing followed him. He reached the base of the approach ridge an hour and a half after leaving the ranch and tied Rourke in a cedar thicket 200 yards from the ridgeline. Checked the sharps one more time, then slung it and went up on foot. Ridge was limestone, low scrub grass between the rock faces, and he went up it in the way he'd gone up the ranch ridge the night before, slowly, using the cover, not hurrying. Wind came at him from the north, consistent and cold, and he felt it against his face and filed it. He reached the top and went to his belly. The Castor Ranch was laid out below him in the full light of the morning. It was a substantial operation, the kind of ranch that had been built with money and intention, with a main house that was larger than most, several outbuildings arranged in a logical pattern, a bunkhouse, a barn twice the size of Silas's. Horses in the corral. Cole counted 11. There were men moving between buildings, unhurried, which said they were comfortable, which said they hadn't been told to expect trouble from this direction. 430 yards, his eye told him, maybe 440. He settled in behind the Sharps and looked through the sight. Main house had a wide covered porch along the front. It faced south, which meant it faced the road, which meant it faced away from Cole's position. He was looking at the back and south side of the building. There was a side door. There was a window. There was a space between the bunkhouse and the main house, where a man stepping out for morning air would be visible from Cole's position. Waited. He had learned patience. Not the patience that some people were born with. He'd never been born with it, but the learned kind, the kind that came from understanding that impatience in his line of work had a specific cost attached to it. He lay on the cold limestone and watched the ranch below and breathed slowly and let his heart rate find the level it needed to find. Waited 20 minutes. Then 30. He was beginning to form a different plan. Work closer. Use the buildings. Do this differently. When the side door of the main house opened, a man stepped out. Cole knew from the way he carried himself before he'd seen anything else identifying. There was a quality to a man who had operated from a position of absolute authority for long enough that it became physical, a particular way of moving through space as if the space were already arranged to his advantage. This man had it. He stepped onto the narrow side porch and looked south, not toward Cole, toward the road, and he stood with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man surveying what he owned. Gideon Vale. Cole had seen drawings, a rough sketch in Reardon's paper's description from the liveryman in Brackwell. Reality matched well enough. Late 50s, well-built for his age, silver-haired under a hat that was a better hat than anyone else on that ranch was wearing. He had the particular quality of presence that money produced when it had been held long enough to become identity rather than circumstance. Cole settled the Sharps against his shoulder. He felt the wind. North consistent 8 to 10. He adjusted left. Thought about what Silas had said more than you think, and adjusted left again by a hair. He found his breath. Vale stood on the side porch looking south toward the road. Hands behind his back, Cole could see in the specific quality of his stillness that he was doing what men like him did in the morning, counting, running the numbers, taking inventory of his position and deciding what the day's moves would be. Cole lay still and held the sight picture and thought about Frank Mercer. Thought about water rights. He thought about 8 families. Thought about Silas on a kitchen floor with blood soaking through his shirt, and a child's tin cup on an empty porch, and Marta Yellen standing in her nightgown in the cold, while a man on horseback watched her furniture burn. Thought about what Silas had said. He was always meant to become the man who arrives when everything is falling apart and refuses to let it stay broken. He held the sight picture, and he did not fire. He did not fire because in the space between decision and action, the space that exists for only a moment in situations like this before it closes permanently, something arrived that he hadn't expected. Not doubt, not weakness, something more complicated than either of those. Did not fire because a dead man in his backyard solved some problems and created others. And because Reardon's papers were not yet in Austin, and because the county judge was Vale's and the circuit judge was not yet involved. Because a shooting at 400 yards with no witnesses except the sky would be called what Vale's lawyers wanted it called. He did not fire because Silas was still alive, and the families in the tents were still in the tents, and a body on the ground. However, warranted was not the same thing as 8 deeds returned to 8 families. He made himself think all of this very clearly and very deliberately, lying on cold limestone with the wind on his face and Silas's rifle against his shoulder. Not when he had thought it through completely, he lowered the Sharps and lay still and watched Vale go back inside. Side door closed. Cole stayed on the ridge for another 10 minutes. He was working through what came next, now that what he'd come here to do had changed in the space of that decision. Sharps was still in his hands. The ranch was still below him. His options were not what they'd been when he rode out of Silas's gate. He went back down. He got Rourke from the cedar thicket and rode south for 20 minutes, putting distance between himself and the Castor Ridge, and then he stopped in a dry wash and sat with his hands on the saddle horn and worked through it. He needed Vale contained. He needed Vale in a position where the legal record Reardon was building could be delivered to the right authority before Vale had time to move his operation, dissolve the company, and reappear somewhere else under a different name. Because that was what men like Vale did when a single operation fell apart. They didn't run. They reorganized, and 3 years later the same machinery was running in a different county under a different corporate name. Documents alone weren't enough. Reardon's papers, delivered to Austin, would trigger an investigation. But an investigation that Vale saw coming gave him time to respond. Affidavits could be discredited. The clerk Hobson could be found and pressured. Surveyed discrepancies could be explained by a good lawyer as clerical error. Cole needed Vale to walk into the investigation before he knew it existed. He needed to talk to him. This was the thought he sat with in the dry wash, with Rourke patient beneath him and the north wind moving through the dry grass on both sides. He needed to ride to the Castor Ranch, knock on the front door, and sit across a table from Gideon Vale and make demands that put Vale in a specific position, a position where agreeing or refusing both produced outcomes that served the families better than either option currently would. It was the kind of plan that worked better in theory than in practice, and Cole knew it. Rode back to Silas's ranch. Reardon was in the kitchen where Cole had left him. Papers were more organized than before. The stacks were consolidated. Some pages had been bound together with thin cord. Reardon looked up when Cole came in, and the expression on his face ran through several things quickly before settling on controlled. Reardon started. "No," Cole said. Reardon let out a breath that told Cole the man had been sitting with that possibility for the entire morning. "How is Silas?" Cole said. "He's been awake. He's been asking about you." Reardon paused. He said, and I quote, "that you had better not have used the sharps for anything dramatic without thinking it through first." Cole almost smiled. "He's going to be fine," he said. "Probably." Reardon looked at him carefully. "What are you going to do?" Cole sat down at the table. He looked at Reardon's organized papers. "How close are you to finished?" he said. "An hour. Maybe less. What do you need from me to speed that up?" Reardon tilted his head. "I need you to tell me every specific thing you know about Vale's operations before he arrived in this county. Anything you've seen or heard in the last 2 years about Consolidated Western Land or its predecessor." Cole thought about it. Then he started talking. He gave Reardon the Laredo operation first, the water rights case that had brought Cole into Vale's orbit, the company name that had been different then, the outcome. Then he gave him the 2 ranches south of the Pecos that he'd passed through where families had disappeared, and the land was now in different hands. He gave him dates where he had them, and approximate dates where he didn't, and Reardon wrote steadily without asking him to slow down. 40 minutes. When Cole was done, Reardon sorted the new material into the existing stacks and looked at the whole of it. "This is enough," Reardon said quietly. "This is actually enough for Austin. Get it there." "I will." But Cole Reardon stopped. He looked at him with the directness of a man who has decided to say something he's been holding back. "If you ride to Vale directly, if you go to the Castor Ranch and confront him, you're putting yourself in a room with 4 men who are all more loyal to Vale than any principal, and no one who knows where you are. Silas knows. Silas is in bed with a bullet wound." Reardon's voice was level, not dramatic. "I'm telling you this because if something happens to you, I need to know which direction to point the people who come asking." Cole looked at him. "North," he said. "The Castor property. 4 miles on the main road." He paused. "And if I'm not back by this time tomorrow, add that to your report." Reardon held his gaze for a moment. "Be careful," he said. "I'm always careful." That, Reardon said, is clearly not true. Cole went to see Silas. The old man was propped up against the headboard with a determination that had clearly overcome the objection of at least one pillow, which was now on the floor. Color was better than it had been at 4 in the morning. Eyes were clear. He looked at Cole standing in the doorway with the sharps and the expression of a man who has decided to ask only the most essential question. "Didn't use it," Silas said. "No." "Why not?" Cole told him. "All of it. The ridge, the sight picture, the decision in the space before the action closed." Silas listened without interrupting, which was his way with things that mattered. When Cole finished, Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Thought about your father," Silas said. "Yes." "That's what stopped you." "Partly." Cole leaned the sharps against the wall beside the door. "Mostly it was the 8 families. A dead man doesn't sign orders canceling a bounty. Dead man doesn't instruct his lawyers to return deeds." Silas looked at him. "You're going to walk in there," Silas said. It was not quite a question, yes, and make demands. 3 specific ones. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they had that winter sky quality, bleached and clear and not missing anything. "He'll agree," Silas said. "Men like that, always agree when they're cornered. Then they send 4 men in the middle of the night. I know. So you're walking into a room with a man who will shake your hand and immediately start planning how to kill you. I've been in that room before, Cole said. Silas looked at him for a long time. Sharps, he said finally. It's yours now, I told you last night, and I meant it. When you come back, he stopped. Start it again. When this is done, it goes with you. Wherever you go next. Cole picked up the rifle from the wall and held it for a moment. I'll come back for it, he said. He rode north on the main road, which was either brave or stupid depending on how the next hour went, and he rode at a walking pace because a man riding fast toward a confrontation had already lost something before he arrived. Rourke moved with his ears forward and his customary attentiveness, and Cole let the horse set the pace because Rourke's instincts about terrain and approach were not things to override without a good reason. Castor Ranch came into view around a bend in the road at around 9 in the morning. Cole could see the front gate, a substantial affair, the kind of gate that announces intention rather than function. 2 men were stationed at the gate. They saw Cole coming from a quarter mile, and they didn't move to challenge him, which meant they were either watching or expecting someone. Rode up to the gate. Cole Mercer, he said when he was close enough. Here to see Gideon Vale. The 2 men looked at each other. Expected? One of them said. He'll know the name, Cole said. Pause. One of the men went to a building just inside the gate, a small structure, probably a gatehouse, and emerged with a 3rd man who looked at Cole for a moment and then walked up toward the main house without hurrying. Cole waited at the gate. He kept his hands visible but not demonstratively so. Didn't reach for anything. He sat on Rourke and watched the main house and thought about what he was going to say. Man came back from the main house after 4 minutes. Go ahead, he said, and opened the gate. Cole rode through. He was met at the main house by a man he didn't need to be introduced to. Build was right. Quality of stillness was right. And the 4 men positioned at various points around the porch visible. Deliberate confirmed it. Terrell was among them, his wrists showing the marks of the cord he'd been in last night. Terrell looked at Cole with a flatness that communicated something specific about unfinished business. Mr. Mercer, Gideon Vale said. His voice was a measured, educated voice, the kind produced by a specific upbringing and maintained through deliberate practice. He stood on the front porch with his hands at his sides, and he looked at Cole with an expression that wasn't what Cole expected. No anger, no calculation that was visible, something closer to interest, genuine curiosity, the expression of a man who has been surprised and finds the surprise worth examining. I'll confess I didn't expect you to ride up to my front door. I didn't expect to be here either, Cole said. He dismounted and tied Rourke to the post at the porch steps, walked up the steps and stopped at the top, which put him at eye level with Vale on the porch. I'd like to talk. So would I. Vale gestured toward the door. Come inside. Cole went inside. The main room was furnished well, not ostentatiously, but with quality. Good chairs, a substantial desk, maps on the walls that were more detailed and more current than the one in Silas's kitchen. There were ledgers on the desk, open, which Vale closed as they sat down across from each other, not quickly, but deliberately, in a way that established the ledgers were private without making a scene of it. Rode to my gate unarmed, Vale said. I rode to your gate with a rifle on my saddle and a revolver on my hip, Cole said. Your men have both now. I'd call that differently than unarmed. Came without threatening to use them. That's accurate. Vale studied him. Up close, he was older than he'd appeared at 400 yards. There was a tiredness around the eyes that the distance had hidden, the specific kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep, but from the sustained effort of maintaining a certain kind of person. Silver hair was real. The quality of attention he directed at Cole was real too, not the practiced attention of a politician, but something more specific. He was genuinely trying to read Cole and finding it difficult, and finding the difficulty interesting. Want something, Vale said. You didn't ride here to threaten me. Rode here to negotiate. I rode here to make 3 requests, Cole said. I'd appreciate you hearing them before you respond. Vale leaned back in his chair slightly. Go ahead. First, the bounty notice with my name on it gets canceled before midnight tonight. In writing, delivered to whoever issued the contract, with copies to 2 parties I'll name. Cole held his voice even. Second, consolidated Western land files for dissolution. Voluntary. Before the end of the month. Vale's expression didn't change. Third, Cole said, the properties your company acquired from families who were coerced or deceived get returned. Where deeds were altered, new deeds get filed. Where families have left the county, they get contacted and offered what was taken from them. The room was quiet. Vale sat with the 3 requests for a moment that was slightly longer than a man sitting with something he hadn't expected needed, which told Cole that Vale had expected something close to this. He had thought about it. He'd known or suspected that Cole's ride to his gate was not going to be a simple confrontation. Those are significant requests, Vale said. Yes. What do you offer in exchange? I ride south and don't come back, Cole said. And the documents that are currently in the possession of a former Uvalde deputy don't reach Austin before you have time to begin the dissolution process voluntarily. Vale looked at him. Something shifted in those eyes. Not quite surprise, but the specific register of a man encountering a piece of information he'd thought he controlled. Reardon, Vale said. He's thorough, Cole said. He's been working on this for 7 months. What he has is enough to trigger a state-level investigation, which means a state-level investigator who isn't your county judge. Cole held Vale's gaze. That happens before you cooperate. You don't control the timeline or the outcome. If you cooperate first, there's a version of this where you walk away. Vale was quiet for a long time. Cole waited. The properties, Vale said. Some of those families are gone, left the territory. Find them. That's not. You found them when you wanted to push them out, Cole said. You can find them now. Vale looked at the closed ledgers on the desk. Cole watched him, watched the quality of his stillness, the minute tensions that ran through a face when a man was calculating the specific shape of his response. He was doing what Cole had expected, running numbers, weighing the cost of compliance against the cost of refusal, trying to find the angle. I'll need time, Vale said. Have until the end of the month. And Reardon's documents? Stay where they are until I see movement on all 3 points. Cole kept his voice level. Full movement, not paperwork that buries the intent. Vale stood. He walked to the window and looked south toward the road, toward the direction of Silas's ranch, toward the country he'd been systematically acquiring. Cole watched his back. You're asking me to dismantle something I've spent years building, Vale said. Yes, on the strength of one man's word. On the strength of documents that don't need my word, Cole said. I'm offering you the choice between doing it yourself and having it done to you. That's not nothing. Vale turned from the window. Agreed, he said. Word arrived cleanly, without hesitation, and it landed in the room with the particular weight of a thing that was too easy. Cole had expected resistance, negotiation, counteroffers. Instant agreement was the tell. Silas's voice in his memory, he'll agree. Men like that always agree when they're cornered. Cole stood. I'll want the first document by tonight, he said. Bounty cancellation, delivered to Silas Rourke's ranch by a man who isn't armed. I'll arrange it, Vale said. Cole picked up his hat from the chair arm where he'd set it. Mr. Vale, he said, I know what you did to my father. Vale looked at him. I know you know, Cole said, and I want you to understand that the 3 requests I came here with are not the limit of what I intend to see happen. They're the beginning of what you owe this county. He held Vale's gaze for a moment. Documents go to Austin, regardless of what you do. Reardon's already riding. What the 3 requests buy you is the difference between a voluntary dissolution and a criminal investigation. He paused. Think carefully about which of those you'd prefer. He went to the door. He walked across the porch, past Terrell, and the 3 others who watched him with the controlled hostility of men who were under instruction to hold themselves back. Gun tied Rourke from the post. He mounted. He rode south at a walking pace. It was 100 yards from the gate when he heard the front door of the main house open. He did not turn around. He kept Rourke at the same pace, the same unhurried walk, because turning around was the last thing he could do. He was through the gate and 50 yards down the road before the tension between his shoulder blades began to consider decreasing. He rode south. Morning had gone to full light. The sky a pale winter blue with the north wind steady under it, and the brush country on both sides of the road looked the same as it always looked, patient, dry, different to what happened among the people who moved through it. Cole rode through it and thought about the specific quality of Vale's agreement, and the window Vale had gone to, and the 4 men on the porch. Thought about tonight. He'd told Vale 1 unarmed man with the document by tonight. What he expected was something different. He thought about what something different looked like, and where it would come from, and what position he needed to be in when it arrived. Thought about the ridge above Silas's ranch. He thought about 400 yards. He thought about what Silas had said about the wind and the drift and trusting the first breath. He rode south and he made his plans, and Rourke moved under him with the steady, reliable patience of a horse who'd carried him out of bad situations before and appeared prepared to do so again. Then the north wind came at them both, and Cole pulled his coat tighter and kept riding. The ranch came into view around the last bend. The fence line first, then the barn, then the house with its thick adobe walls that held warmth in and noise out and had been built to last by a man who'd understood that some things were worth building to last. The southern fence was repaired where Cole had fixed it. Held. Cole got back to the ranch at 10:30 and told Reardon to ride within the hour. Reardon didn't argue. He'd had his papers bound and ready before Cole dismounted, which said he'd been expecting this moment since Cole rode out that morning. Put the documents in his saddlebag with the particular care of a man handling something that had taken 7 months to assemble and could not be replaced. And he stood in the yard for a moment looking at Cole with the expression of someone who wants to say something useful and can't locate it. "Austin," Cole said. "Straight through, I know the way." Reardon checked the buckle on the saddlebag. After, you come back with whatever the land commissioner gives you. Whatever authority, whatever process, whatever paper makes the return of those properties legal and binding." Cole looked at him. Families need documentation they can file, not just Vale's word. Vale's word isn't worth the air it takes to say it. "I know that." Reardon mounted. He sat his horse for a moment looking at the ranch, the fence, the barn, the house with its thick walls, and something moved through his face that Cole recognized as the particular weight of a place that had held against something that wanted to end it. "Tell Silas," Reardon started. "Tell him yourself when you come back," Cole said. Reardon rode north on the south road, which curved eventually to the east and around the long way to San Antonio and then Austin. Cole watched him until the brush closed around him. Then he went inside. Silas was sitting up in bed when Cole came through the bedroom door, which was more vertical than he'd been 4 hours ago and was clearly the result of a sustained argument with his own body that his body was losing. He had a cup of water on the bedside table and the medical kit open beside him, which meant he'd been redressing the wound himself, which meant it had needed redressing, which meant the night and the morning had cost him more than he'd indicated. "You should have called me for that," Cole said. "You weren't here." Silas looked at the cloth in his hand. "How bad is it really? The redressing? The wound?" Cole sat on the edge of the chair and looked at it honestly. "It's not going to kill you if you don't do something foolish. If you get on a horse in the next 3 days, it opens up and becomes a different problem." Silas looked at the cloth. "Vale?" Cole told him. "All of it. The gate, the porch, the 4 men, the room with the closed ledgers." He told him about the 3 demands, and Vale's immediate agreement, and what that agreement actually meant. Silas listened without moving, and by the end of it, his expression had the quality of a man who has had his worst expectation confirmed and finds no satisfaction in being right. "Tonight," Silas said. "Yes. You think he sends all 4? "I think he sends whatever he thinks is enough," Cole said. "Sent 14 the first time. He sent 1 through a window the second time. He'll calibrate to what he's learned. He's learned that 1 man isn't enough, and that 14 isn't either." Cole looked at the map on the wall. He could see it through the open doorway, Silas's pencil marks, his own additions. He'll send the 4 close men, Terrell Birch, Cade Doak. People who've operated together, who won't break when something goes wrong. 4 men who know what they're doing, Silas said. "Yes." Silas was quiet for a moment. "You can't hold the ranch against 4 professionals alone," he said. Not a challenge, a fact stated plainly the way Silas always stated facts. "I'm not going to hold the ranch," Cole said. "I'm not going to be here when they come." Silas looked at him. "The ridge," Cole said. The old man understood immediately. Cole could see it arrive in his face. Ridge above the ranch, the position that overlooked both the road and the main approach to the house. Position Cole had used the first morning to watch Halsey's 14 men organize. Position that, from the opposite direction, gave a clear sight line to the front of the Castor Ranch. "They'll come to the house," Cole said. "When nobody's here, they'll look for me. They'll look south first, because that's where I moved the horses. Won't look up." Silas looked at him for a long moment. "That only works if you're already on the ridge before they arrive," he said. "Which means you leave before dark. I leave now." Cole stood. "I need you to stay in this bed. I need the house to look occupied, lamp in the window, smoke from the chimney. Patch on the porch. Patch will do whatever he wants. Usually wants to be on the porch." Cole picked up the sharps from the wall. "Can you manage the fire?" "I can manage a fire, Cole." I've been managing fires since before your father was born. I know you can. Cole looked at him. Silas. The old man looked back at him. Things Cole had been carrying since Silas told him about Frank Mercer. Not grief, exactly, because grief for his father was an old thing by now, worked down to something manageable over years. More like the specific weight of understanding, of knowing the shape of the thing that had been done and who had done it and why, and holding all of that in the same hands, while also holding a rifle and a plan and a responsibility to 8 families who didn't know his name. He didn't say any of that. He didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't sound like a speech, and Silas deserved better than a speech. Thank you, Cole said, for telling me about my father. Silas held his gaze for a moment that was longer than a moment. I've told you himself, Silas said quietly. He just didn't get the time. Cole nodded once. He picked up the sharps in his coat and went out through the kitchen and across the yard to the barn, and he saddled Rourke and rode him south to the cedar brake, where the horse could stay hidden and content. And then Cole walked back north on foot to the base of the ridge and began to climb. He reached the top in the last full light of the afternoon and settled into position. Waiting was the part that required the most from him. Not skill was the easy part, the part that lived in his hands and his eyes and came out when it was needed without requiring conscious effort. The waiting required something else. It required sitting with himself in the particular company of a man who has made a series of decisions that cannot be unmade and who is now waiting for the consequences of those decisions to arrive, and who does not entirely know whether he made the right ones. Thought about his father. Frank Mercer had been 38 when he died, 4 years older than Cole was now. Cole had done the arithmetic of that before, but it landed differently tonight on a cold limestone ridge in the dark, with the sharps across his arms and the north wind steady at his back. 4 years. Not a long runway. Not enough time to say everything that needed saying or to finish everything that needed finishing. Cole thought about what his father had left unfinished. He thought about what he himself had left unfinished, in all the places he'd been, and the work he'd done, and the people he'd met and moved on from. He'd told himself the moving was necessary, that a man in his position had to keep moving to stay ahead of the consequences of being in his position. And that was true, as far as it went. But there was another truth underneath it, that staying required a different kind of courage than moving did, and that Cole had never entirely trusted himself with it. He lay on the ridge and watched the road in the dark, and let himself think that clearly, without finding a way around it. Night was full and cold, and the stars were sharp. Could see the lamp in Silas's front window from the ridge, a small warm point in all the dark, exactly what it needed to be. Smoke from the chimney, visible against the sky in a pale smear. Porch a dark shape below the lamp. Patch was presumably out there, somewhere doing exactly what Patch always did, which was whatever he found most comfortable at the moment. 11:15 by his count, 4 shapes appeared on the north road. They came without lights, which confirmed they knew exactly where they were going. They moved in a spread formation, not bunched, not in line, the particular arrangement of men who knew how to approach a defended position. Cole watched them come down the road and angle toward the ranch. Went over the fence, rather than through the gate, which was another tell. Quiet entry. They knew someone was inside. They were trying to get to the house before whoever was inside knew they were there. Cole let them reach the house. He watched 2 of them go to the front door and 2 circle to the back. He watched the front door open. Silas must have heard them, and he watched one of the 2 at the front raise his weapon toward the doorway. Cole fired. The shot crossed 400 yards of dark air and accounted for the north wind with the correction Silas had given him more than you think. Trust the first breath, and the man who had raised his weapon went down before the sound of the shot arrived at the house. Everything happened quickly after that. The second front man turned toward the ridge toward the muzzle flash, and Cole was already working the reload. 2 back men came around the side of the house. From inside, Silas's rifle spoke once, a sharp crack that said the old man had positioned himself at the side window where he had an angle on the back approach, wound or no wound. One of the back men went down, the remaining 2 the second front man, and one of the back broke for the road. Not running in panic. Moving fast with purpose, which was what professionals did when an operation went wrong. Got to their horses and they rode north, and Cole let them go, because 2 men riding hard with nothing to report to but an empty Castor ranch was not a threat. Was it a retreat? He waited 20 minutes on the ridge to be certain. Then he climbed down. Silas was standing in the kitchen doorway when Cole crossed the yard. He was holding the rifle with his good arm and his other arm, The wounded side was held close against his body, and his face had the color of a man who has recently done something his wound had opinions about. He was upright. He was standing on his own land in his own doorway, and that fact had a weight to it that Cole felt across the yard. Could have stayed in bed, Cole said. You weren't here, Silas said. It was the same thing he'd said about the wound dressing. Cole almost smiled. He checked the two men on the ground. One was Terrell. The other was a man he didn't recognize. Both were beyond any further decisions or instructions from Gideon Vale, which was what the situation required. Went inside. He sat down at the table, tired in the specific way that arrived after a long operation, not sleepy, not depleted, but wrung out at some deeper level, a place where decisions and tension had been living for 3 days and had now been released. He put the sharps on the table and looked at it. Silas came and sat across from him, moving with deliberate care. Neither of them spoke for a moment. It's done, Silas said. Ranch part is done, Cole said. Vale himself is still up there, without Terrell and the others. Without his close men, yes. Run, and knowing that Reardon is riding to Austin. Cole thought about Vale standing at the side window of the Castor Ranch that morning, looking south at what he'd been acquiring. A man in the process of discovering that a thing he'd built was coming apart from directions he hadn't sufficiently protected. He'll run. Men like Vale, they don't make a last stand. Calculate. He'll run and he'll try to surface somewhere else eventually. Not here, Silas said. Not here. Silas looked at the sharps on the table. He reached over with his good hand and touched the stock once, briefly, and withdrew his hand. Your father taught me something, he said. In 43, when we were young and foolish and thought courage was something you either had or you didn't, he paused. Said, courage isn't the absence of knowing better. He said it's doing the right thing while knowing exactly how much it's going to cost. Cole looked at the rifle. He knew what it would cost him, Silas said. Did it anyway. Both times I watched him do it. And I think he stopped. I think that's what you've been carrying. The idea that doing the right thing cost him everything and might cost you the same. Cole said nothing. But here you are, Silas said. Still here. It was quiet for a long time after that. The fire burned in the next room. The wind pressed at the windows and the adobe walls held it out. Outside, the Texas dark was the same Texas dark it had always been indifferent. Enormous. Patient with the small things that happened inside it. Cole thought about 8 families. He thought about the tin cup on the empty porch rail. Thought about water. In the morning, Tom Kress came back from San Antonio. He arrived before full light, his horse lathered, and himself road-worn, and he carried acknowledgement from the County Land Commissioner's office that the water rights copies had been received and filed. He also carried a letter he hadn't expected, from a clerk at the Commissioner's office who had seen the filing and flagged it to a senior official, because the senior official had been watching Consolidated Western Lands filings for 8 months on his own initiative, following a pattern of survey irregularities that matched operations in 2 other counties. Reardon's papers, when they arrived, would find ground that had already been prepared. Kress sat at Silas's table and told them this, and drank coffee, and looked like a man who had been riding for a very long time and had found it worth it. Families, Cole said. The ones in the tents east of Brackwell. Still there, Kress said. But they heard about what happened here. One of Halsey's men talked at the saloon in Brackwell, not to help anybody, just couldn't keep his mouth shut, and word got out about the 14 riders being turned around. He paused. They're not in the same place they were. The families. Waiting for something. They're going to need representation, Cole said. Someone to work with Reardon's documentation when it comes back from Austin. Someone who knows the filings and can match them to specific families and specific properties. Kress looked at him. I can do that, Kress said quietly. My brother-in-law, the one who sold, he's still in Laredo. His neighbor is in the tents east of town. I know every family on that list. He paused. I've been knowing them for 15 years. Then that's your part, Cole said. 2 weeks before the Austin documentation came through, and in those 2 weeks, several things happened in the order they needed to happen. Vale left the Castor property. He left before the documentation arrived, which was the calculation Cole had expected, a man running ahead of a legal proceeding rather than standing to face it. He left behind ledgers, which was the kind of mistake a man made when he was leaving fast and convinced himself the numbers were too obscure to be read clearly. Reardon, arriving back from Austin with a state investigator, read them clearly. They were thorough, they were damning, and they named operations in 4 counties over 5 years. Bounty on Cole's name was canceled by the company's registered agent. a lawyer in San Antonio, who presented with the dissolution documentation and the information that his primary client had fled the territory, made the practical decision quickly and without sentiment. First deed was returned in the third week. It went to a family named Aldrich, a man, and his wife and their 3 children, who had been living in a borrowed room in Brackwell since August. The deed was the same property they'd owned. The same house, the same pasture, the same water access that Consolidated Western Land had leveraged them off of with threats that were never put in writing. State investigator witnessed the filing. Kress was present. The woman, Mrs. Aldrich, held the deed in both hands and looked at it for a long time without saying anything. And what she eventually said was quiet and specific and private. And Cole, not who was standing near the door, looked away to give her that. 7 more deeds followed over the next month. Not without difficulty, 2 of the properties had been resold to parties who had not known they were buying stolen land. And those situations required negotiation and compensation arrangements that took time and patience and several letters that Reardon drafted and redrafted. 3. Not everything was returned in full. 2 families took monetary settlement rather than the physical property because they'd started lives elsewhere in the interval and couldn't come back. That was the part nobody tells you about afterward. The part where justice isn't clean and the accounting doesn't balance exactly, and some things that were broken don't reassemble into their original shapes. Silas understood this. Silas recovered. It took longer than Cole had said, 5 weeks instead of 3. And during those 5 weeks, Cole was there, which was not something he'd planned, but which happened anyway. The way some things happen, not by decision exactly, but by the gradual accumulation of days in which leaving seemed less important than what was still being done. He repaired 3 more fence lines. He helped Kress coordinate the deed returns. He rode with Reardon twice into Brackwell for meetings with the state investigator. He ate at Silas's table every night. The old man got stronger by increments that were sometimes invisible day to day but were visible week to week. The way healing worked when you were 71 and stubborn, and had decided the wound didn't get to determine anything important about your life. He was walking without the arm held close by the end of the 2nd week. He was riding carefully, grudgingly, with Cole's eyes on him by the end of the 5th. On the morning Cole finally packed his saddlebags, Silas came out to the barn. Cole was tying the sharps behind the saddle wrapped in oilcloth, Silas's oilcloth, the same wrapping it had always had. "South?" Silas asked eventually. "Where first?" Cole tightened the lacing on the saddlebag. "There's a man in the Pecos Valley I need to find. Someone Vale's operation touched before it came here. His case is still unresolved." Silas was quiet. "There's always another one," the old man said.
"Yes."
Cole turned to look at him. "Is that an argument for stopping?" "No." Silas put his good hand on the barn post, the way he stood when he was deciding what to say from everything that was available. "It's an observation. Some men are made for a particular kind of work and spend their whole lives trying to talk themselves out of it. Your father was like that. He'd come back from something hard, and he'd spend a week telling me he was going to settle somewhere and take up something sensible. Cattle, farming, carpentry, whatever. And then somebody would need what he was good at, and he'd go." Cole looked at the sharps behind the saddle. "He didn't regret it," Silas said. "I want you to know that. He didn't regret any of it. Regretted the time it took sometimes. The distance, not the work itself. He paused. He was proud of you. Said so every time I saw him. Said you were going to be better at it than he ever was, because you thought more before you acted." Cole held the saddle horn and looked at the barn wall. "I don't always think enough," he said. "Nobody does. That's not the point. The point is you try." Silas looked at him. "That's more than most." Cole mounted. He looked down at the old man, at the weathered face and the pale eyes and the bound shoulder visible under the open coat, at the particular quality of stillness that Silas carried. Stillness of a man who had decided a long time ago what his life was about and had not revisited the decision. "Fence on the south line," Cole said. "I redid the post on the far end. Pulling loose. I noticed. Check it in the spring." "Check it in the spring." Cole nodded once. He turned Rook south. He didn't look back. Not because he couldn't, but because some things didn't need the last look to be real. Silas Rourke was standing in his barn doorway on his own land, with a repaired fence and a recovered wound and 8 families, a short ride away, who were in the process of getting back what had been taken from them. That was real whether Cole looked at it or not. He rode south. Brush country opened around him the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, patient. North wind had died in the night, and the morning was still, the particular stillness of the Texas border country when it wasn't in the process of arguing with the weather. He could hear Rourke's hooves on the dry ground and the creak of the saddle, and somewhere to the east, a hawk working a thermal above the creek. He thought about what Silas had said, about men made for particular kinds of work who spend their lives trying to talk themselves out of it. He wasn't sure that was entirely true about himself. Wasn't sure it wasn't. Here's what he did know. He had come to Callaway Ford carrying nothing but a reputation he hadn't entirely chosen and a history he was still learning the full shape of. He was leaving with the sharps behind his saddle and the knowledge of what his father had known in his last years, and the specific memory of 8 people holding deeds to their own land. Work wasn't clean. It had never been clean. 2 men were buried on the Castor property because they'd made professional decisions that ended where professional decisions sometimes ended. And Cole carried that the way he carried everything he'd done in his life that he couldn't undo. He didn't pretend it was simple arithmetic. He didn't pretend that the good on one side of the ledger perfectly balanced the weight on the other. Families were home, or going home, and the water that ran along Callaway Ford Creek, the water that every ranch downstream depended on, children and cattle and crops depended on, that water was not going to be controlled by a man who used it as a lever to take everything from people who had nothing else. That was real, too. He rode for an hour, stopped to let Rourke drink at a crossing. Creek was cold and clear, and ran over flat limestone in the way of border country creeks, shallow and honest without pretense about what it was. Cole watched the water move and thought about a man in a canvas duster watching fires he'd ordered, and about the particular coldness of power that had stopped thinking of other people as people. He thought about what it took to become that. How many small decisions accumulated into a character like Vale's? How many times a man chose the efficient cruelty over the inconvenient decency before cruelty became his natural language? He thought about the opposite, about how many times a person had to choose the inconvenient decency before it became load-bearing, before it became the thing you could stake a fence line on, or a family's future, or a man's sleep at night. He didn't have a clean answer to that. He wasn't sure. Clean answers were the appropriate expectation for questions that size. Rourke finished drinking and raised his head and looked south with his ears forward. "Yeah," Cole said. "Let's go." He rode on. The sharps rode behind him, wrapped in oilcloth, smelling of gun oil and walnut, and the particular history of a careful man's careful work over 6 years. It was not a comfortable inheritance. It was heavy and specific, and came with knowledge he'd spent years not quite having. It was real, and it was his, and he was carrying it forward instead of leaving it behind. That was the only way Cole Mercer had ever known how to do anything that mattered. Carry it forward. Keep going. And leave whatever piece of the world he'd touched a little more intact than he'd found it. Rode south into the still morning, and the ranch at Callaway Ford held the horizon behind him for a long time before the land's long curve finally took it away. Pa!